So hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto is neglected by his family and becomes ANBU Black Ops. Part 1. If you guys enjoy this, what if, and you want the next part of this video, comment down below. And let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And also share this video with your friends. And check out the description. And check out my playlist. So let's start the video. Chapter 4. 2 years later, Naruto, now 14, stood outside the academy with his hands in his pockets. His appearance hadn't changed much over the past 2 years. It hadn't changed at all actually. The only key differences being his gain in height and the loss of his once favorite jacket. He simply grew out of it, so he gave it to Minato to one day give it to Menma when he could fit it. Other than that, nothing had changed. His hair was still the same with the right side still shaven down more so than the rest. He still wore his black t-shirt and ANBU pants with black sandals. An addition to his ever-present look however was the necklace he wore that brandished the Uzumaki spiral symbol, a gift from his mother for his recent birthday a few months back. You could argue another addition was the new book he had shoved into his face. After so many years of reading and rereading the one he received from his friend all those years ago, people had come to associate it with his apparel. This book was green. As he read his new novel, he noticed the parents and other adult commoners beginning to chatter and mutter among themselves in awe. Looking to see what the commotion was, he turned to see Itachi walking his way. The brunette hadn't changed in the slightest. He still wore the same Uchiha high-collared shirt with his ANBU pants and sandals, and he still maintained that ponytail of his. His fame within the village was the only thing that altered. Itachi became the true essence of what it meant to be a Konoha shinobi. He was recognized publicly throughout the village for his accomplishment of becoming ANBU commander at the ripe age of 13, just a few months ago. Ever since, his popularity was rivaling that of the Hokage himself, which is a position most people said he was close to reaching. "Hello, Naruto," Itachi said, leaning against the wall next to the blonde as he waved at the group of parents waiting for their children to get out. "Hello to you as well, Itachi," Naruto replied, not looking up from his book. "Here for Sasuke?" "Yes. My mother is attending Yoshino-sama's baby shower as well," he replied as the blonde nodded. That was the reason he was going to be taking Mito and Menma for the remainder of the day. "What do you have planned for them?" Itachi asked. Naruto looked up in thought. "I am unsure. I imagined a bit of training and possibly something to eat a little later. Would you mind us joining? Izumi and I are watching over Sasuke for the day as well." Naruto nodded. "Of course. I must confess, I was not too interested in trying to entertain Mito and Menma all day anyways. Not alone that is." Itachi chuckled at that, understanding completely. With a resonating slam, the doors of the academy swung open. Kid after kid funneled out to their waiting parents or began their journey home with their friends. All of course pausing at the spectacle that was Itachi Uchiha. Eventually, the class holding all of the clan children was finally released. Sasuke was one of the first kids out. After greeting Naruto, Itachi said they were going to go on ahead and pick up Izumi and that they'd meet up later. And there, Naruto waited with his book in hand, unaware of the leering eyes upon his form. Eventually Mito and Menma came out and immediately began explaining their day down to the minor details. Naruto just listened in false interest all the way back to the Namikaze compound. When they arrived, Naruto began their training by having them do their normal warm-up routine while he read his book. When they finished, he instructed them to work on their chakra control by performing the tree climbing exercise as they balanced a leaf on their forehead simultaneously. They were of course disappointed as they were hoping for something a bit more deadly. Or at least new. To get them to work twice as hard, he told them if they worked hard enough, he would show them a technique so amazing that it could beat anyone within seconds. He was of course blowing smoke, but they didn't have to know that. It did have the desired effect of further motivating them as they pushed themselves twice as hard as they would have. When all that was said and done, they were finally joined by Itachi, Izumi, and Sasuke. "Okay guys," Naruto said dropping off of the tree he was resting in. "I think that's about enough training." "What?" Menma yelled still out of breath. "What about our super amazing technique?" Naruto looked at Itachi in amusement. "Oh yeah, that. Well, that is for another day. You guys are too tired now. Besides, we're gonna go eat." "What's the technique?" Sasuke asked Itachi in a low whisper. Itachi just chuckled, never giving a formal answer. "Naruto Nai, are you gonna take us to the party?" Mito asked. Naruto just looked at her while questioning. "It's Ino's birthday, they're having it at the Akimichi grill house," she informed him. "No. I don't want to go to that," Menma protested. "It's nothing but a bunch of stupid girls." "You're stupid," Mito yelled back, kicking off a fresh back and forth verbal fight between the two that the others ignored. Naruto sighed and looked over to Sasuke to break the tie. "What do you think, Sasuke? Would you like to go to the party or would you rather us go elsewhere to eat?" Sasuke, at first, was going to say no, but the look Mito gave him told him she'd be heartbroken if he did. He didn't care for her much, but he'd rather not make a girl cry. I guess it wouldn't hurt. Maybe we will see some of our friends there too. He said, directing that last sentence at Menma, who crossed his arms in defeat. And from there, the group headed out to the Akamichi grill house. Break. The happy birthday song just ended when the group finally made it. Cake was being served and they saw everyone else had probably already eaten. Well, Naruto said. We could just get a table in order then. But, Nai-san. Mito said, looking up at him. I want cake. You have not eaten Amato yet. It would be unwise to. Oh come on Naruto. Itachi said, just let them eat cake for dinner. Naruto looked down at Mito's pleading eyes and at Menma who, despite trying to stay mad, was looking over at the huge cake in hunger. I suppose it would not be so bad. He said, sending them off. The three ran into the party section in which one of the moms helping handed them a party hat and a plate so that they could get their slice. Naruto and the Uchiha couple found a seat towards the back of the restaurant. Naruto sat with his back to the wall to keep an eye on his two siblings. Hard to do with the book now shoved into his face. Itachi and Izumi were having their own conversation over something he had no interest or knowledge in, so he just continued reading. Every now and then, he'd glance up to make sure everything was still okay. A few times, he had thought he saw Kakashi again, but couldn't get a good enough look. The night's events went on as they usually did, with Naruto joining in the conversation as they ate their food and then seamlessly melding into his book, leaving the two once again to talk of their own things in virtual privacy. A few minutes went by and Naruto peeked over to the party again, wondering when it was going to be over. He had assumed it would be over rather quickly upon their tardy arrival, but they were still going at it. Sticking his nose back into his book, he continued reading until he finally heard the sound of child footsteps jogging towards their table. Looking up, he was greeted to the side of Mito and another girl jogging up to the table, with the Hyuga heiress being dragged along as well. Naruto Nai. Mito yelled as she and the other two girls stood at their table. Itachi and Izumi stopped their conversation to watch the spectacle. I want you to meet my friends. She said happily as Naruto raised an eyebrow. I always tell you to meet them, but you're always too busy. She said, mimicking his voice to the best of her ability. Naruto closed his book with an amused expression. Well, okay then. He said, sitting straighter in his seat. The pink-haired girl was the first to respond. I'm Sakura Haruno. She said, extending her hand to the blonde. It's nice to meet you. I hope you're better than that Bakamenma. She said with a grimace. Naruto smiled at the girl. It is lovely to meet you, Sakura-san. I am Naruto. He said, disregarding her remark about his brother, choking it up to her possibly being one of Menma's pranking victims. But that said, the group sat in silence until Mito finally lost her patience. Ugh. Come on Hinata. He won't bite. She said. Hinata slowly crept out from behind the redhead. I'm Hinata. Hyuga. She said her last name so low it was almost inaudible. Naruto extended his hand to her as well, which she took timidly. It is an honor to meet you, Hinata-san. Naruto said with a reassuring smile that made her face heat up. There. Said Mito with a smile. Now you know all my friends. Except for Ino. She went to the bathroom. She said, craning her head around the room, trying to spot the blonde. When she did, she quickly flagged her down. Ino. Over here. The whole group looked her way for a brief second before Mito began talking again. Ino's heart was racing sporadically as she made her way over to the table, much more Hinata-like than she was comfortable with. On her way, she quickly ripped the birthday hat off of her head, throwing it onto some nearby table as she fixed her hair. When she finally made it over, she waited for Mito to finish whatever rant she was on as she discreetly examined the boy that melted her confidence down without even knowing it. His eyes were locked onto Mito with a soft smile that she couldn't help but stare at. And this, Mito began, breaking her from her daze. Is Ino. Aka, the birthday girl. Pulling her hand from behind her back for the briefest of waves, not directed at any of the table's occupants, she whispered a quick, hey. That was so out of character for her, Mito looked at her strangely. Oh, so, you're the birthday girl? Izumi asked in apparent excitement, in which Ino nodded. That's so cute. She said, gushing at the innocence of the blonde. In other words, demeaning her age considerably. How old are you? Clearing her throat so that she didn't stutter, she answered. 10. Well, happy birthday. Izumi said kindly with a smile. I too wish you a happy birthday. Itachi added. Ino threw the two a quick thank you as she tucked her bang behind her ear. Ino? Said Mito, grabbing her attention. She looked over at her, seeing she was gesturing towards Naruto. This is my brother Naruto. Naruto was already reaching forward to shake the girl's hand. It was very nice too. His statement stopped there as his nearly empty cup of water was now running down his leg, having been knocked down by the very shaky-handed girl. Oh no. Ino said in worry. I am so sorry. Luckily the cup wasn't full so there wasn't much of it. Naruto simply waved her off. It is quite alright. It was only a bit of water. No harm done. He said, extending his hand again. Ino reached a lot more gently this time so as to not embarrass herself further. I wish you a very happy birthday Ino-san. If I am not mistaken, it would seem your father is preparing to leave. He said giving her an escape. She looked over to see him paying the bill, quickly she bid the group bye as a whole and ran for him. Nito just raised her eyebrow at the strange occurrence. She had never seen the blonde act like that. Huh. Weird. She whispered to herself. 3 years later, perched in a tree, an ANBU member looked into the window of a secluded house. The rain above is doing well at muffling the screaming from within. His form was completely hidden within the shadow of the top of the tree above him, only being illuminated briefly by the flashes of lightning that struck sporadically. In his hand, his black sword held in a reverse grip. The ANBU watched the men guarding the house walk along a very strict pattern, not bothered by the rain in the slightest. Their weapons lazily held at the ready for anyone foolish enough to attack. They had no idea that their death was a mere 10 feet away, shifting his feet ready to pounce. When he did, they were gone before they even knew it. He went for the nearest guy first, slicing his throat before grabbing his body, laying him down gently. Then, he jumped up to the ledge the other was on. The guard was a ways away when he turned around. It was right at that moment that a flash of lightning hit, illuminating the ANBU's form and the sword flying at his head for a brief second. The very last thing he would see. The ANBU ran by, ripping his sword from the man's head, before jumping feet first into the tiny window that he barely made it through. When he landed, he realized how lucky he was as a guard had just passed by not 5 seconds before he jumped in and was already walking away. He snuck up behind him and snapped his neck in one clean motion. Shoving the body into the nearby closet, he continued on silently. He could hear a man screaming from the basement of the mansion. He made his way towards it, killing 2 more guards on his way. Suddenly, he heard the screaming man abruptly stop. Having the target located, he continued on, gently opening the door. Once inside, he saw a brown-haired man in a lab coat cleaning materials from the last experiment he was undergoing. He silently walked in. When the doctor reached over to set his scalpel down on the wooden nightstand, his hand was impaled by a kunai, nailing him to the surface, electing a scream of pain from him. Ah. Ah. The man turned around and plucked the blade from his hand as he scrambled around the table. He pulled a tag out and wrapped it around the kunai. There was a very small hole at the top of the ceiling that led outside. Aiming right, he threw it as hard as he could. To his horror, it was plucked out of the air. Horror because it was an explosive tag meant to alert his unknowingly dead guards. He watched as the ANBU held the blade in his hand, it briefly emitted a blue light before the man dropped it carelessly to the ground. Yako Tashi, you have been sentenced to death by the Council of Konoha for the abduction and murder of over 100 individuals taking residence within the borders of the Land of Fire. With that said, the black blade ended the pleas of the man with a quick slash that cleanly removed his head from the rest of his body. With his mission completed, the ANBU left the mansion and took to the trees, leaving no trace of him being there other than a few dead bodies that were set aflame. Hours later, the ANBU agent stood in front of his locker, stripping his armor from his body. The last thing he removed was his mask. He now stood in his street clothes. A set that hadn't changed since he was young. Black t-shirt, black pants, and black sandals with his necklace dangling in the middle of his chest. Exhaustion in his eyes and a sore body to go along with it, he shut his locker. Walking out of the locker room, the 17-year-old trudged through the grey hall down until he reached the head commander's quarters, where he was told to go when he returned. Wordlessly, he knocked on the door awaiting the command to enter. When a voice called out to him, he opened the door and slowly walked in. He took a seat in the chair opposite the man across the desk. The bold man with coal black eyes, Captain Yasha, pierced into his own blues with a false bravado that made a fair attempt at masking his sympathy. Namikaze. He began, stopping as he lost the words he was prepared to say, losing himself in the cold seas in the teen's eyes. How are you doing? He asked suddenly. The blonde had absolutely no movement, not a single blink. I am well, Captain Yasha. He replied with slight fluctuations in his tone. His lack of physical expression made it a much creepier response than it was meant to be. How are you? The captain looked at him in curiosity, not even attempting to hide the fact that he didn't believe him. I'm fine. Naruto, the reason you are here today is because a few of your comrades have expressed their worry when working with you. They say you've become more reckless than you usually are. Naruto held his motionless visage. What a strange grievance. He remarked. Well, until you have seen Inoichi-san for evaluation, I am afraid I must place you on leave. Captain Yasha said, noticing the very slight reaction of the blonde's jaw clenching up. Once you are cleared in your evaluation, you may return to service. Please turn in your mask. He finished as he began filling out documents, accenting the fact that the conversation was not up for debate. Naruto stared at the wall in thought for a few more seconds. Standing up, he pulled his mask from his back pouch and set it down onto his desk. "I bid you a good day, Captain Yasha," he said as he turned to leave, receiving only a grunt of confirmation. Break. Walking through the street, he looked up into the shower of the rain above him. Shutting his eyes to protect them from the falling droplets. Hands in his pockets and no destination in mind, he strolled along in silence. Nothing to distract himself. It was another day of feeling absolutely exhausted. Feeling undeniably drained, yet being unable to keep himself from doing something, anything that could cloud his mind. The past 3 years were the most eventful years of his life. It was expected, however, as his family was very unique. Mito and Menma becoming genin last year seemed to be where it started. They were thrown on a team with Sasuke, of course, and were handed over to Kakashi. Their rookie class became renowned among the village just a few months ago due to their performance within the Chunin exams. The event went off without a hitch and came down, surprisingly, to some extremely great matches during the semifinals. Eventually, his brother claimed victory over the entire competition. Aside from that, the kids always seemed to find themselves in some very interesting altercations. From fending off A-rank ninja to saving important individuals, the list went on and on. Life went on and on, no matter what happened, it went on and on. Through the years, Naruto has known many emotions and has experienced them himself. He's felt fear, anger, joy, content, happiness. But the one thing he lacked to a very extreme degree was love. It had been absent within his heart as he watched those around him become ensnared in it. Seeing Itachi and Izumi moving in together, watching as his younger brother slowly fell in love with the pink-haired girl he had met all those years ago. Even the budding romance of Sasuke and Mito. To Naruto, it seemed as though love was all around, yet out of his reach. For he was always around people that overshadowed him. Whether it be Itachi, Menma, or even his father who seemed to just refuse to age. He had come to terms with it a long time ago. He was jealous, not of their significant others specifically, but of the admiration they received. He was just as accomplished as anyone, yet he wasn't seen, wasn't heard, he wasn't even really noticed. It was just like before. His life was on a constant cycle of never being someone's main priority or focus. It was a selfish desire he had a few years back when there weren't any other problems to focus on. That was something he found strange. Why is it that certain things become problems due to a simple lack of conflict? When he was in his pessimistic state of mind, his problems were a lot deeper than a simple lack of affection. But, as soon as he made peace with that part of himself, small things became the things he obsessed on. It's almost as if we, as human beings, thrive on struggle more so than anything. It was a possible theory that would explain most of what we do. We search for love because love ultimately and eventually incites conflict in some way. We go to war in hopes of being alive long enough to tell our story, all for the sake of proving our own worth by making it through more traumatizing experiences than any other. As if that would somehow make you a better person than whoever it is you try and talk down on. A crazy theory he had, of course, but it was something that was definitely a possibility. Regardless, he craved that level of human interaction more so than anything. He wanted to be important to someone in some way. He wanted the villagers to admire him the way they did Itachi. He made it to ANBU at 11 years old too, so where was his congratulations? He wanted to be respected like Menma, they shared the same last name. The same resemblance to the man they associated him with, why wasn't he treated like a celebrity? Was he wrong for feeling that way? If you had asked him a few months ago, the answer would have been a resounding yes. It was completely wrong to be so selfish. The optimistic views instilled in him by his friend contorted his mind into some kind of newfound naivety that he doubted he ever had to begin with. Itachi's words to him that day were misinterpreted. To Naruto, Itachi was saying to always look towards the positive side of things instead of focusing on the negative. After a few weeks of practicing the new tactic, it became second nature. It became a part of his mentality altogether. Now he knew, Itachi wasn't saying to only focus on the positive. He was saying to look towards the positive while being aware of the negative. Naruto just cut the latter off completely, blinding himself from the world around him. But, just like the character in his new book, the world just seemed to laugh at him. His new book explained his situation fairly well. It was just a continuous series of bad events that broke him down mentally and physically. A constant stream of misfortune that seemed too chronological to be random. The world was punishing him for something he had never done. He didn't understand why, or what to do because of it. The premise of the book involved the antagonist explaining how easily it is for a sane man to end up just like him. How easy it is for one to lose their mind. It was a detective novel, of course, that involved the protagonist searching high and low for the insane man, but for some reason, the antagonist stole the story. It was a dark book that discussed a lot of topics going on in today's society and the great wars of the past. Naruto had read it at least 100 times since he got it. He was reading it right now, in fact, as he memorized every line of every page. A rare find for him, he fell in love with the story. Stopping at last, he was in front of the interrogation building, which is where the psychological evaluations were also undergone. He trudged into the building, not worried about the wet state of his clothes, as he noticed the ground was wet regardless. He walked through the building until he reached the office of the head psychiatric doctor, Inoichi Yamanaka. He knocked on the door. Hearing the muffled enter from inside, he opened the door. Inoichi was finishing paperwork until he glanced up quickly to see the blonde. "Ah, Naruto," he said, finishing the document. Naruto took a seat in the chair in front of his desk, just as he had earlier that morning. He waited patiently, motionlessly. When Inoichi finally set his paperwork aside, he sat up straighter in his seat with his fingers interlocked on the desk in front of him. "I was not expecting to see you so soon." "Hello, Inoichi-san." Naruto greeted the man. Still that false fluctuation riddling his voice that just did not go well with the frozen look he displayed. Inoichi intently examined the boy, trying to see some physical indicators that would possibly interfere with the examination. He didn't have to look far, as his eyes said it all. It looked as if he hadn't slept in days. Trying to see if maybe the boy just wanted to speak of something else before he sent him on his way, Inoichi began. "So, what can I help you with?" "I was told to receive an evaluation from Inoichi-san. A few of my co-workers fear I am unfit to serve," he explained. Inoichi just watched him attentively. His eyes traveled his form, noting all of the small signs that just screamed that the kid was not right. Nodding his head slowly, Inoichi pulled his documents back to the center of his desk. "Well, I am very sorry to say, but I cannot give you a proper evaluation. You are too tired for it to be an accurate assumption. What do you say you come back next week and we'll do it then?" "I am fine, Inoichi-san," Naruto said in hopes of changing his mind. Inoichi nodded as he went back to signing documents. "I am sure. We'll find out next week." Days later, he laid in his bedroom, staring at his ceiling from the surface of his bed. The last few days melded together, becoming essentially the same day. He hadn't left his apartment since leaving Inoichi's office that night. There was nowhere to go. No one to see. He refused to walk through the streets anymore, as all that awaited him were side glances and chatter that he just knew were about him. The new pariah of the village he was. All he had left was his family's backing, which wasn't much when they were all gone. Jiraiya and Kushina took Mito and Menma on a training trip for an undetermined period of time. They had been gone for a few months now, missing the events that happened since. What was it that happened? Well, the deaths of Itachi and Izumi Uchiha, of course. It was a true tragic story that had a twisted ending. Naruto couldn't explain it to anyone because no one believed him. All they knew was that he killed them, but they didn't know the story. The true story, in a condensed version, is that Izumi Uchiha was captured by a man that had given them fair warning before. Orochimaru captured the girl while she was out on a mission with her team. When the others returned with the news, Naruto was out on a mission of his own. By the time he got back, Itachi had already gone out to look for her, abandoning his status as a Konoha ninja to do so. Naruto pleaded with his father to go and assist him, which Minato reluctantly agreed to. Naruto tracked his best friend to a somewhat hidden base along the outskirts of Kusa. When he showed up, Itachi was sitting in the middle of the floor in what seemed to be an arena of sorts. Naruto called out to him, but he didn't respond. Instantly, he knew something was happening. Itachi turned on him and attacked him out of the blue. He wouldn't explain why, he just began attacking. Naruto adamantly tried to explain that he wasn't there to take him back. He tried to explain that he was there to help, but Itachi continued attacking him with the clear intent to kill. They battled for hours on end, with Naruto trying all he could to calm his friend down. In their hour-long battle, Itachi told Naruto of the circumstances set for him by the Snake Sannin. He gave him an ultimatum: either kill Naruto Namikaze or he would kill Izumi. Naruto nearly convinced him that if they were to work together, they could kill the snake and save her. But, as luck would have it, Orochimaru showed up with a knife to the girl's throat. Itachi realized there was no chance of saving her other than doing as the man said and ending his friend's life. With a heavy heart set in stone, he continued the battle. Izumi's pleading in the background held most of his attention. The battle could have gone on forever with Naruto just dodging Itachi's attacks. Naruto at first thought it was a poor plan by the snake for the simple fact that he held no leverage over him. What drove the point home that this was supposed to be a deathmatch is the next person he brought out. A bound and gagged Mito with tears streaming down her face. Immediately, Naruto wondered how in the hell the slithery man could have gotten his hands on her. He had first tried to rush the snake to get her back. In doing so, a barrier shot up around the room, officially setting the arena as the snake kicked his feet up to watch the spectacular battle that was bound to happen. A spectacular battle it was, the two held nothing back as they fought for their hearts. Influenced by the wails of crying coming from the two girls to save them. Eventually Naruto got the upper hand and was able to kill his friend. The last thing Itachi saw before he died was Izumi's throat being slit. Naruto's soul broke completely witnessing the death of his two best friends, one of which was by his own hands. Never before had a kill made him feel so cold. The only way he could keep himself together was the thought of him saving his sister. That illusion broke as well. When the barrier dropped, Naruto looked up to the balcony to see not one, but two cynical smiles staring down at him. Orochimaru chuckled at the blonde's confusion. Naruto's teary eyes were plastered on Mito as she shared the same smile while standing next to the snake. To his shock and horror, her appearance changed into a man he read about in the bingo books. Not famously known, but an ability very impressive. 100 transformation Kaizen. Orochimaru and his associate escaped before the barrier fell. By the time it did, the heartbroken Naruto had no will or strength left to search for the duo. Instead, he carried the bodies of his friends all the way back to the village. Upon arrival, the people mourned the death of the village's famous couple. Their questions demanded answers. It was meant to be confidential, but a leak from the ANBU guarding the Hokage during Naruto's mission report began the spread of the rumor that was partially true. Within weeks, everyone knew that Naruto Namikaze killed Itachi Uchiha. They just didn't know the full story. And so, he was ostracized by everyone who admired the two. Rumors spread on why he had done it, each more ridiculous than the last. Some say he was jealous of Itachi for having Izumi, so he killed Itachi to get him out of the way. When he did, Izumi didn't want him, so he killed her too. Another said he just snapped out of the blue. None of them are correct. It made it worse that they accused his father of playing favorites, acquitting him of his crime just because he was his son. That is why he was slowly sinking back into his old pessimistic views. His hope for the world slowly reduced to nothingness. His will to live, carrying the fact that he killed his best friend, dwindled completely. There was no light in this world anymore. Not for him anyways. The lack of missions was making it worse. He had been taking them one after the other just to keep his mind busy with the added benefit of avoiding the hateful gazes he received every day. The world was laughing at him. Every chance it got, it kicked the shit out of him with no mercy. What did he do? Well, he didn't know what he could do yet. It hadn't gotten to the point in which he felt he had to do something. No, he would wait it out with a sliver of his previous naive hope that it may get better sometime soon. He just had to wait. In his bed is where he would do so. Staring at the white ceiling above him, watching as it melded seamlessly through the colors of the daylight and eventually the moonlight, day after day. Sitting in his office rubbing his temples, Minato signed another document. The recent years weigh on his mind heavily. The stress of everyone everywhere begging him to do something about one thing or another was eating him alive. He didn't know who to listen to. The council was the worst as of recent. The latest tragedy of Itachi Uchiha's death was at the center of most of it and consequently, so was his son. They demanded his head. Even as Minato explained that Naruto's action was within the law, as Itachi was essentially a nuke ninja, they refused to hear it. They wanted vengeance for the loss of Konoha's #1 ninja. They wanted him to pay for his crime which Minato adamantly refused. He would not kill his own son for something he would have done had he been the one to go. Minato knew for a fact he wouldn't have hesitated to end the young prodigy's life if Mito was in danger or if he thought she was. Sadly, most of the requests for a trial came from his close friend Fugaku. The entire Uchiha clan was stricken with grief and they demanded he pay for his crime. Minato actually feared the outcome of the end of all of it. There were only a few ways it was bound to end. With either Naruto getting killed or the Uchiha clan packing up and leaving Konoha for good, weakening them considerably. As a father, he wanted to protect his son as best he could, but as a Kage, the village always came first. It broke his heart, but if a threat such as that were to be issued, he would have to try his best and get the sentence of death reduced to possibly prison or exile. Neither of which he wanted. With Naruto racking up mission after mission as he had been the past few weeks, he'd possibly have something to argue his case for freedom for. Maybe they would see reasoning with the village's current lack of manpower. He doubted it. The world was at a moment of stasis. Not peace, but a great lack of major conflict that could possibly incite a war. It was calm. Hearing reports from both Captain Yasha and Inoichi gave him more to worry about. Now, he was finding out his son may not be stable. That was cause for concern as well. For a man as skilled as Naruto, being unstable could mean another Orochimaru case. A madman running loose among the elemental nations. No, he wouldn't believe it. His son was fine, all he needed was some sleep. As he thought that, a ball flew in through the window, emitting a purple gas that left the ANBU in the room falling from their spots. Minato jumped to his feet with his kunai in hand, staring at the figure that jumped through the window. He had a hood covering his face as he charged the blonde Hokage. They engaged in a brief taijutsu match before another squad of ANBU burst through the door. The hooded figure kicked Minato away, gaining some distance before charging towards the window. He threw an explosive tag at the roof above before jumping out. When he did, he peeked back inside at the blonde Hokage who was surprised by the face beneath the cloak. It was his own son. Unfortunately, the ANBU within the room saw as well and gave the order to others that Naruto Namikaze has attacked the Hokage. With that, they pushed their way through the falling debris, intent on finding the blonde teen and arresting him. Minato was still shell-shocked at the turn of events. There was no covering this one up. He just couldn't believe Naruto would attack him so carelessly. He could have easily caught him just then, but his shock wouldn't let him move. He couldn't understand what had happened. Or maybe he could, but he just refused to believe it. Naruto remained staring at his ceiling, as he had done all day, when he suddenly heard someone quietly enter his home. As a trained ANBU operative, he heard it clearly and drew a kunai, readying it for whatever fool tried to attack him. He could hear multiple things in his house shifting or moving with someone's influence. Waiting around the corner, completely calm, he waited as whoever came rushing in. When they did, he ended their life with no hesitation until he saw that it was one of his own ANBU agents. A guy he knew, more specifically. Instantly, he dropped the kunai in his hands and fell to the ground, spewing out a string of no's in urgency. No, 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 hey. Hey. He said, putting pressure on the slash in his neck, trying to stop the blood from flowing out. His hand glowed green with medical chakra, but before he could heal the injury, he was tackled to the ground by a group of other ANBU agents. With his face pressed against the floor, he looked down to the end of the hall and perched in the window, staring back at him, was himself. His eyes grew considerably with the smirk he was given before the visage changed into some random civilian and jumped away. The knee pushed his face down, muffling his cries to go after the real perp. He struggled more and more, just to get to a position where he could at least talk, but as soon as he did, the ANBU on his back delivered a chop to the back of his neck, putting him to sleep. His headband was removed from around his neck. 2 months later, his body slumped over on his knees in the middle of the room filled with people who hated him, and his father's saddened gaze upon him. Naruto stared blankly at the ground beneath his knees. The room sat in silence awaiting the verdict they had all arrived to at long last. For the past 2 months, Naruto was being held in the ANBU prison as he made his own case to defend himself when he was called before the council. He explained every assumption he arrived at, even re-explaining the situation involving Itachi's death. The council was split in their thinking. Most of the civilians were undeterred by his story. But the clan heads and higher-ups seemingly understood, if even a little. Understanding and forgiving were different things as explained by Fugaku. When he explained what he believed happened the night he was being charged for, he told them of seeing 100 transformation Ks and fleeing the scene while he was being detained. The one thing he couldn't explain was the man's motive. The only possible answer he had was that the man was possibly intent on ruining his life. The council would not accept such a runaround excuse, so his only possible explanation was seen as unreliable. Now, they just waited for the inevitable sentencing. Minato stood to his feet, no attempt at masking the pain of his duty. Naruto Namikaze. For the crime of attempted murder against Ukage. And the murder of a fellow Konoha shinobi. You have been sentenced to life in prison. His voice grew softer and softer as he spoke. Even when all was said and done, the room remained completely silent. I am so sorry, son. The only sound now was the clanking of Naruto's shackles as he was being hauled off by 2 of the ANBU guards. This time, to the real prison. 1 month later. 1 month. One hellish month that fell into a new cycle that was far less than favorable. It couldn't have been helped however, as the prison was run by his biggest fans, the Uchiha clan. With the testament of what happened the day of Itachi's death directly to Fugaku's face, he had hoped it would be enough to at least make peace, but the past few weeks told him otherwise. His first night there was the loneliest he had ever been. He wasn't placed with the other prisoners immediately. Instead, he was taken to one of the abandoned divisions in the lower levels. It was there that the guards felt he needed to be taught a lesson. Sure, he could have fought back and probably killed them, but he figured there was no point. It would do him no good anyways. They beat him severely for the first few days, taking turns venting their frustrations out and getting revenge for their fallen clan prodigy. His daily torture was only accented by the lack of proper treatment and bare essentials. He was given one very unfavorable meal a day, water twice a day and a shower that could not be used. That was his cycle for the time being. When the guards had finished having their fun with the blonde, he was at last moved up to the regular prison levels. His first cellmate was a man who had a grudge against his father for his sentencing, as did more than a few others. In other words, after Naruto endured the beatings from the guards, he had thought they would stop. Of course, life had more jokes for him. His permanent fate of enduring more beating being one of them. They had their fun with him whenever they felt as though they wanted to hit something, and when staring at a wall was your main activity, you always wanted to hit something. The guards always turned a blind eye to the events, whether they be in the courtyard, the cafeteria, or the hallway. They would always stand aside and watch until his attacker got tired before bringing back order. For those who really hated him, they gave the prisoners the lower floor for the purpose of having fun for as long as they wished. It was down there that they attempted to kill him. It was down there that Naruto Namikaze finally lost it. While down there, one of the attackers got the idea to drown him in the water from the shower, knowing full well the issue that made the lower levels inaccessible. There was a reason the lower levels were no longer used. They ran on the same pipelines that were used by the old lab of the Snake Sannin. Pipes that he used to dump his toxic chemicals before he fled. That day, there were hundreds of prisoners that died because of it. Sadly for Naruto, that wasn't the case for him. His Uzumaki blood seemed to allow him to fend off the internal effects it caused. But, it did well in changing his appearance. Not to an extreme level, but it did dye the hair on his body blood red. In a stroke of irony, he looked as though he were born with the color just as his mother and sister. It was just another part in the series of bad events, this one finally broke him. All the men stood around his broken form, watching him throw the blackened liquid off his body, they laughed. Thinking back to his favorite book that he was no longer able to read, he realized something. The book was completely right. Everything it said made perfect sense. The world around him was laughing at him. It was kicking dirt in his face and laughing its ass off. Everyone around him was intent on assisting. They were quick to notice him when he did something bad, but when he tried to play the hero and just be a morally correct person, he was forgotten about. No matter what he did, he was overlooked as if he belonged in non-existence. It was at that moment, as he kneeled on the floor with his skin burning and black liquid still pouring out of his eyes, ears, mouth and nose. He pushed his hands through his newly red hair, still covered in the murky black liquid, holding his hair to his head. And he laughed. He cackled like a man possessed, freezing the surrounding men almost instantly. They watched him laugh in absolute silence. One of them, who felt brave enough from kicking his ass all day, stepped up with the plan of delivering another kick to his face. When his leg came within range, Naruto grabbed his ankle in an iron grip, clamping down harder and harder. He was no longer laughing. With a violent jerk of his wrist, he broke the man's leg. The man screaming is all that broke the silence of the barren prison chamber. The 4 remaining men got into fighting stances, seeing that he was finally planning on fighting back. Only one of them was smiling as he was an ANBU agent himself and felt that he could take him. The others weren't so sure, 2 of them barely reaching the rank of Chunin and one of them barely making Genin. Naruto stood up with his back to the group, not affected in the slightest by the man screaming bloody murder next to him, trying to crawl away. He was still casually wiping the black water off his body. Pulling a strand of hair down, he examined how blood red it was. Huh. He admired it. That is. Uncanny. Ha 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 ha. He said with a gassed-out chuckle that did little to settle their nerves. The former ANBU commander was tired of the anticipation. Now was his best chance to attack. He leaped forward intent on delivering a kick to his back. Naruto sidestepped the attack and grabbed the off-balanced man in a chokehold. Without a moment's hesitation, he snapped his neck with a nauseating cracking sound. When he dropped the body to the ground, the other 2 lost faith in their chances of defeating him. Their only chance was to make a run for the door to get the attention of a guard. When they took off running, Naruto slowly turned around and began walking their way. Passing by the whimpering man with the freshly broken leg, he stepped on his injured appendage, inciting another hell-curdling scream from him. Don't go too far now. I'll be right back. Ha 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 ha. The 2 men made it to the metal door and began beating on it repeatedly, begging for someone to open the door. The guard that was usually at the top of the stairs wasn't there this time. Turning around, they saw the red-haired teen, still partially covered in the black water, casually strolling their way. In urgency, they began hitting it harder and harder, trying to break the door down. Naruto strolled towards the 2 in apparent amusement. A small grin plastered on his lips and an intense look in his eyes. Watching the 2 men fight for their lives was amusing him in some sick way. Even more so when they turned to face him. Resolved in their eyes and a will to live, they charged, one after the other, and died in the same order. But those 2 handled, he casually walked back to the last man standing. Well, crawling. The man was still on the floor with his head tucked against his forearms and his body trembling. Naruto grabbed the man by his broken leg and swung him around until his body crashed into one of the cell doors. His fit of screaming turned up to another level completely. Naruto squatted down to gaze into his eyes. In doing so, the man tried to throw a swing at him. Naruto caught his fist with his left hand and with his right, jabbed him in the bicep. When that appendage dropped lifeless, the man pulled the shank he was hiding up his left sleeve and slashed at him. Naruto easily disarmed him, disabling that arm as well. The man regretted his actions almost immediately as he watched a blonde twirl it in his hands, examining its quality. Huh. You brought me a toy. He said, taking the blade in his hand. When he suddenly stopped, the man looked him in the eye with more fear than he was expecting. Naruto's visage became softer, almost sincere. What's wrong? You were laughing at me just a moment ago. He said. You don't look good with a frown. Let me fix that. Ha 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 ha. Grabbing the man by his hair, he stuck the blade in his mouth and gave him a partial Glasgow smile. There, now even in your grave, you'll be smiling. With that, he slit his throat and watched the blood pour out in a steady stream. Then, he sat there in the middle of his heinous crime and waited patiently for the guards to return to 5 dead prisoners and a new man, laughing at the ironic turn of events. Marking this day as the day he finally lost his mind and lost himself. The day he simply laughed back. There was no longer a Naruto Namikaze. That boy was gone. Now, all that remained was no one. Chapter 5 1 year later, on the 3rd floor of the Konoha maximum security prison, 3 men struggled down the hall passing cage after cage of men who are in their rightful place within the establishment. One a skinny brown-haired man dressed in his orange jumpsuit, the other 2 Uchiha guards pushing him along, struggling the whole way. The prisoner looked absolutely terrified, begging the guards desperately to not force him to go wherever they were taking him. He did everything he could to prevent his movement. Dropping down to the ground, pushing his feet against the rails and indentations of the walls on the way by. The men within their cells that watched him pass by chuckled and threw out words of false encouragement that only increased his fear. "Oh, come on. Please," he yelled, trying his hardest to push back against the 2 men. "Kami. Please. I beg you." His pleas fell on deaf ears as they dragged him away, towards the very last cell that had 3 empty cells next to it. The man even begged to be put into one of those, but they had their orders and stuck to them, throwing him into the cell and shutting him in. The man quickly got to his feet and ran for the cage, trying to throw it open before the guard locked it. "No. Please," he said, grabbing onto the bars as they walked away. Soon, he was left there, left to hear nothing but the chatter of the other prisoners in the distance. He refused to turn around as fear racked his entire body. From behind him, he could hear tapping. Following the advice given to him before he was brought in, he tried not to make a single sound. The shaking of his lip was allowing the smallest of whimpers to escape his mouth. That's what he focused on for the time being. His heart skipped a beat when he heard a whistle that was clearly intended to get his attention. His mind was ripping itself in half trying to weigh his odds. If he didn't turn around, he'd be disrespecting him, but if he did, well, they had only heard stories. Figuring he'd have to face his fears at some point, he turned around timidly. The cell had the basic layout the rest of them did, with a bunk bed off to the right side, a toilet sitting in the back left corner, a sink against the back wall, and a small table and chairs bolted to the floor in the middle. In the seat facing him, his new red-headed cellmate sat, holding a deck of cards that he tapped on the table portentously in rhythms of 3. A very intense look in his eye that was directed solely at the skinny man standing in front of him. Stalking him as if he were the most interesting thing to him at that moment. "Hello," he called out slowly. "Looks like we're cellmates now." The man tried his hardest to clench his trembling lip as tight as he could. His hands were held protectively against his chest, and his eyes refused to meet the steely gaze of the redhead. Forcing himself to reply, he whispered out. "Seem like it." His tone was riddled with so much fear, he berated himself for even trying. The redhead smiled at him. "Hey, would you like to be my friend?" The council chamber was once again filled to the brim with people that at this point were becoming very annoyed with the case they were discussing, the case of the sentencing of Naruto Namikaze. His enraged family brought the case up every month since their return with new arguments and questions. Minato continued bringing the case to the floor as it was his decision which trials they discussed each time they got together. With their society being a militaristic dictatorship, they could not speak out against his ruling, excluding special cases such as a shinobi's imprisonment, which was the current issue. Sitting in the middle of the room along a table, directly in front of the main council members, was Kushina, Menma, and Mito along with Jiraiya. All there to plead the case or give a testament. "All I'm saying is that it doesn't make sense," Kushina said, pulling out cards that she had written facts about the case on. "I mean, Naruto claimed it was the working of 100 transformation Kaizen that posed as him. So, why was he not searched for when you received this information?" Danzo Shimura was heading the meeting with the agreement of Minato, who understood the case was too personal for him to rule favorably. That information wasn't received until the morning after the attack. By that time, he would have been nearing the outskirts of the Land of Fire. "So you just decided not to even entertain the idea that he could have been telling the truth?" she asked incredulously. "Don't be foolish, of course we did. Namikaze's claim for a possible motive was too ridiculous to be taken," he replied. At this point, Jiraiya stood up. "I agree, but I'd argue the kid was too emotionally distressed to give an accurate motive." "So you're saying you have one?" asked Hamura from his side. "Actually I do. You see, the death of Itachi Uchiha is linked to this. Kaizen posed as his sister to get him to fight Itachi. He was working with Orochimaru at the time." He let that ring in the air for a few moments. Danzo rushed him to elaborate. "What is your point, Jiraiya?" "It's Orochimaru," Jiraiya yelled out as if the case was completely obvious. "I mean, come on. Do you not know his motives for what he does?" "And what would that motive be?" Fugaku asked from his spot. "He wants him. He wants to make him a monster because he saw his potential," he answered. Danzo seemed completely unconvinced. We are not here to base motives off of speculation. Regardless if we accept your ridiculous guess of intention, Naruto Namikaze has solidified his position within prison. He has killed an active Konoha shinobi and 28 men while incarcerated, including 3 guards. We argue self-defense. Kushina replied instantly. Heiei-san was within Naruto's residency unlawfully, to Naruto's knowledge, and as a shinobi, he was within his rights to kill all of them. He even expressed the fact that he killed him by mistake. Before Danzo could argue his point, she continued. Naruto himself was found beaten and chemically tortured by the guards who discovered the scene. That means nothing. Danzo replied. Inoichi-san, would you please explain to us your last psychological evaluation with the prisoner in question? He said, directing everyone's attention to the man. Inoichi shifted in his seat a little, feeling uneasy about incriminating the son of his friends. My evaluation with Naruto Namikaze was quite informative. He said, coughing into his hand. He was very unhinged, if I were to describe it. His topics bounced around sporadically. His personality shifted completely from when I had last spoken to him. Do not beat around the bush, Inoichi. Danzo demanded. Tell them what you told me. They need to hear it. Inoichi cursed the man. He looked down into the eyes of the man's family in sympathy. Naruto Namikaze showed heavy signs of psychopathy. When we talked, he spoke of his intentions of what he wished to do if he were ever released. Describing things along the lines of mass murder and inciting wars. Kushina and the others couldn't believe it. It wasn't true. What do you mean by signs of psychopathy? Jiraiya asked. Well, when evaluating someone, we begin with basic questions used to determine their emotional state. From their answers, it is decided if they are in need of the test. Naruto's answers were completely unrelated to the questions being asked. So, I began to ask him more hypothetical questions to see how he reacted to them. His answers were circuitous to say the least. Inoichi explained. So, you marked him insane because he answered your questions indirectly? Jiraiya asked in a deadpan tone. Well, it's a bit more complicated than that. He said. The questions are used to get them ticking. Make them feel as though they're not in control. When they feel as though they are losing it, they will either react violently or use some other motive to return it to their favor. Naruto is quite slick with his words. He led me into a conversation that left himself explaining what he was talking about, as I did not understand. In other words, he shifted the conversation towards a subject only he knew about, making himself the only person with words on the subject, putting himself in control. That doesn't prove anything. Mito yelled out, finally joining the conversation. Naruto Nai is just smart. He is indeed. Inoichi continued. Which is why he knew he could shift the conversation towards his own favor. Aside from the mental battle we had, his physical tendencies were unbalanced as well. What? Did he shake his leg too fast? Jiraiya jokes. Inoichi brushed off the comment and continued on. No, it was more subtle things. For one, he only blinked once. The family just stared at him incredulously, visually asking if he were serious. Our conversation was 2 hours long. He clarified. Look, Kushina, I am terribly sorry for what is happening to your family at the moment, but in my opinion, I have never seen a look like the one Naruto has in his eyes. He's not the same boy he was when you left. If you continue in your journey to get him released, and you succeed, I fear for us all. Kushina's expression was downtrodden. She stared at the table beneath her hands, thinking over his words. No words of reply to the statement. He was trying to demonize her son. What could she say? There is no need to fear Inoichi. Danzo said, looking down on the group in the center of the room. Naruto Namikaze will never leave that prison. Actually, he will. Said Fugaku, surprising everyone. They all looked at him in questioning. Was he siding with Kushina? Naruto has become too dangerous to keep within the prison. He is responsible for talking 7 of his previous cellmates and neighboring inmates into committing suicide. It has gotten to the point in which we have had to clear out 6 of the cells next to his to prevent it from happening further. With the overcrowding state the prison is in currently, you can see how that is a problem. In our need to place more than a few inmates in solitary confinement, we have come to the point of threatening to move them to his cell to keep them in line. Since the death of one of the guards, however, the others are afraid to go near him. So where else do you propose we put him? Minato asked, finally joining the conversation. Fugaku thought it over. Well, if we decide he is a lost cause, he can be sent to Hazuki Castle. He said, receiving a shake of Minato's head. Or, he could be moved to the asylum in the care of Inoichi. It's a less stressful environment with the same containment tactics. He suggested. All the cells are isolated and he'd receive the proper treatment he needs. Minato looked down and thought. It was a lot better than prison, but if Naruto were a danger to the prisoners, then would it be wise to stick him in a place where they were granted virtually more freedom? I will leave the decision up to Inoichi. He said, looking over to the man. Inoichi looked down and thought. I have a haunting feeling that I should probably refuse, but I suppose it would be best. He nodded his head. Danzo interrupted. For it to be a possibility, there must be restrictions as he is still imprisoned. He said. Minato nodded begrudgingly as he had given him authority over the case. There will be no interaction between Namikaze and the other occupants. He will not be allowed recreational time as he is not a patient, he is a prisoner. Might I suggest a 2-hour psychological session as well? Total isolation could cause more harm and aggression than is recommended for someone of Naruto's skills. Inoichi said. A 2-hour session is approved. If at all possible, get him mentally sane enough to be moved back to the prison. Regarding his skills, they will not be an issue, he has a complex seal blocking off his chakra made for prisoner containment by the Nidaime himself. It has stood strong for years. Danzo said. Inoichi nodded, blowing out a sigh with clear worry riddling his tone. Hold on. Fugaku said. Who would you have to undergo his evaluations? Well, I have a staff full of capable psychologists, most of which were trained by me personally. They are all highly capable. He answered. Fugaku gave him a look that did nothing to settle his nerves. I'd advise putting only your best. Preferably yourself. He said, giving no further information. Finally tired of holding their tongues, Kushina spoke up. Hang on, don't we get a say in this? She asked. I am afraid not. Danzo said. Your argument today was pushing for your son's release. That is not and will not ever happen. Furthermore, Naruto Namikaze will have no visitors other than those granted special clearance as he is still a prisoner of capital offense. He will have the same lack of laws he would have had within the prison. He said with finality that enraged the Redeed beyond belief. That is the final result of this Hokage-sama meeting. Minato stared at the top edge of his podium with a disappointed look as well. He was of course unsatisfied with the verdict but was already plotting strong points for the next argument that was most likely going to take place next month. He was the Hokage, so he decided on whatever case he chose no matter how many times he chose to do so. If that is all, everyone is dismissed. He said, standing up himself. Kushina was packing the papers and various forms she brought back into the folder, glaring at Danzo who looked right back at her apathetically. This isn't over. She warned him as her and the others headed towards the exit. Danzo just snorted at her remark. I'm sure. 3 hours later, the Namikaze house was subdued in utter silence. Mito, Menma, Jiraiya and Kakashi sat around the table listening to the aggressive cooking taking place in the kitchen. Mito and Menma still silently arguing as to not disturb the others stuck in the thought of their defeat. Jiraiya was thinking of things they could use for the next case but was drawing complete blanks. Everything he came up with somehow found a way to counter itself or was seen as invalid due to some of the things already discussed. This was extremely important to him and the others could tell. Although they would like to believe it was all for Naruto, it wasn't. He loved the boy, but this was also a chance to finally get Konoha to actively search for and apprehend his old teammate or even kill. He's known Orochimaru for years and if he's learned one thing, it's that he is a very patient person. No matter how long he had to wait, he would see his plans come to fruition, and with a mind like his, Jiraiya feared what that could mean. Minato walked into the silence, knowing full well he was expecting it. He hung his cloak up and made his way through the dining room, greeting everyone on the way by. He entered the kitchen to see Kushina chopping vegetables so aggressively that it was cutting into the wood of the cutting board. He walked up next to her, getting her attention. We made progress. Chopping even harder, she replied instantly. Heh, progress, she mocked. What fucking progress? We got him sent to a house full of wackos and sick people. How great. That's not what I meant. Minato said, looking down in thought. We've gotten the backing of a few more of the clan heads. What good is that now that you put that one-eyed fucker in charge of everything? She asked him to spit out the term she used for Danzo with venom. Minato rubbed his face. Look, I had to. Shikaku thought it would be a good idea. He said a few of the clan heads were siding against us because they thought I was playing favorites. So? I bet if it were one of their kids they'd do the same. Fucking thing. She said louder, splitting the cutting board in half. Minato walked up and gently pulled the knife from her hand. Calm down, calm down. Look, it's not over. We'll bring the case back up next month and we will keep bringing it up until we have him back. He said, rubbing her arms to soothe her stress. We will get him back. I promise. Kushina's body just slumped against his, trying her hardest to keep faith in his words. After a year of doing this, it felt like she couldn't believe him and with Inoichi's statement, she knew the situation got a lot harder. 3 days later, 4 armed Uchiha guards as well as Fugaku himself walked down the halls of the prison towards the last cell. Walking past the cells of men sitting in a shocked silence the further they went. One of them holding a load of equipment that jingled with every step. Finally making it to the last cell, they peered inside to see a sight that was disturbing. Naruto sat in the chair on the opposite side of the table facing them and his cellmate was beating his head on the wall. Blood splatter dripped down the wall in front of him. "Kario, get him and take him to the infirmary," Fugaku said as they opened the cell. Naruto stared at Fugaku in amusement. "Ah, Fugaku-sama. It's been a while," he said with a small smile resting on his lips. His eyes barreled into the Uchiha leaders with such intensity it was unsettling. "What is the reason for this visit?" he asked him casually. Fugaku and the others stepped into the cell, the one with the equipment timidly walked around the table and got behind the Redeed, pulling him to his feet. "You are being moved to the asylum as you have become too dangerous to remain in this prison," Fugaku explained. "Well there, you will have the same lack of rights you have here." He repeated the words of Danzo. He threw him a set of white clothes to further accent that this was no joke. "You think I'm crazy?" he said in amusement, holding the clothes in his hands. Fugaku crossed his arms, meeting the intense gaze without fear. "What I think is of no importance. An expert has deemed you a certified psychopath. Put him on," he demanded. Naruto only smiled at him. "I prefer oranges," he started casually. "I don't care," he replied with his stoic look still in place. Naruto chuckled and removed his clothes and slipped into the white uniform. When he finished, his arms were bound tightly behind his back and his feet were shackled together. "An expert, huh? So, Inoichi-san believes I am crazy." He started with a smile. Before he could say anything else, a muzzle was placed over his mouth so that he could not speak. "Aside from that, your actions within my facility have been a hindrance to my staff and the functioning of the prison. You will be moved to the asylum where you will have no contact with the patients and no recreational time. In addition, you will attend a 2-hour-long session with a psychologist every day," he informed him. He couldn't see it, but he just knew the Redeed was smiling. The two Uchiha guards on either side grabbed onto his elbows and began ushering him out the cell and down the hall. On the way, his casual gaze peered into the cells of the men still frozen in silence as they watched the psychopath being led down the hall, all of them noticing the white getup and finding it fitting. Fugaku was amazed by how much fear he was able to instill in the men of their horrible nature. Naruto was like a monster to these monsters, and it only ensured him that he should never be allowed to roam free. Pushing him out the front door of the prison, the 3 Uchiha police force members marched him through the woods that led to the psychiatric ward that was about a mile through the backwoods of the village. Naruto didn't struggle in the slightest. He played visual mind games with the ward staff that were heading back to the village in the opposite direction, giving them playful gazes and eye smiles that were completely unsettling. Finally arriving at the asylum, Inoichi was already waiting at the door with 2 of his biggest staff members ready to take over from there. Naruto gave the blonde man an amused look from behind his muzzle. His concentrated gaze bored into his skull with unknown intentions. The Uchiha guards handed off the prisoner to the 2 workers as Fugaku greeted Inoichi. Shaking the timid man's hand, he gave his parting words. "Best of luck, Inoichi," he said slowly. Inoichi exhaled and nodded his head at the man as he and his clansmen walked away. Inoichi took the lead, walking the 2 guards and his new patient prisoner along with him. Naruto looked around at the new scenery of all white while he was being pushed along. It was a new experience in contrast to the usual gray walls he was used to. A blinding one at that. They passed hallway after hallway, passing many rooms and offices. Making it to the stairs, they climbed up 3 flights before finally stepping back into a hall. In the distance, Naruto could hear chatter. As he was pushed along, they passed by what he assumed was the recreational center, as there were a bunch of white-clothed patients doing various tasks inconsistent to what it looked like they would be doing. Like the 2 men sitting at the chessboard staring off into space or asleep. He was pushed along until he could no longer see them. After that, it was more white halls with patients being led down the hall or back into their rooms. He received looks of fear from more than a few of the ward employees on the way, which was familiar of course. Finally, at the very end of the hall was a single room, far away from the others, marked with his name. Inoichi pulled out his keys and unlocked the metal door. They walked the blonde in and halted him in the middle of the room. Inoichi pulled out a needle and flicked it twice. He stuck it in Naruto's neck and his body began to slump forward. The 2 guards grabbed hold of him and carried him towards the pad in the corner, laying him down. Inoichi pulled out the keys Fugaku gave him and removed the cuffs and shackles from the Redeed. When he finished that, another of his employees brought in a straitjacket that they secured tightly on Naruto's form. "Will that be all, Dr. Yamanaka?" asked one of the workers standing next to him as he looked down at Naruto. With a sigh and a nod, he turned around. "Yes, that is all. Return to your tasks," he said, ushering them out before stepping out himself and locking the metal door. It always pained him to see someone he's known since they were children end up in this place. It happened all too often for his liking. The next day, sitting in a room with metal chairs and a metal table, all bolted to the floor, Naruto stared up into the dangling light above. His straitjacket was secured with chains connected to the floor. He was sat down a few hours earlier by 2 of the workers and was told to wait for his session to begin. Eventually, the door opened up and Inoichi walked in with a vanilla folder in his hand and a cup of coffee tucked in his elbow to free his mother to shut the door. He strolled over casually, not even looking Naruto's way yet. Sitting down, he sat his stuff down and looked towards the blonde. Naruto's intense gaze was already on him with a small smile tugging at his lips. Inoichi ignored the look and pulled a notepad and a pen from his pocket. "Good morning, Naruto. I will be handling your psychological sessions for the time being. I would like to start out by asking you some simple questions." "I believe we have already done this, Inoichi-san," Naruto said, amusement in his voice. "Don't tell me you have to reevaluate me now." Inoichi shook his head. "These are different questions," he said, flipping a few pages. Naruto waited patiently with his smile fading in and out. "Now, do you know what you are doing here?" "Well, an expert," he said with a hint of amusement, "has deemed me clinically insane." Inoichi didn't react to the statement. "It's a little more complicated than that," he said. "Naruto, I'm not here to treat you like a criminal. Okay, I've been on your side since before your trial." Naruto just nodded mockingly. "I want to help you," he said seriously. Naruto looked up and thought. "Ugh, if only I could believe you," he said in false exasperation. "And why can't you?" Naruto shifted in his seat, giving Inoichi a confused look and a smile. "Well, you told me not to," he said wittily. Inoichi raised an eyebrow at the statement. He hadn't said anything like that. Seeing his confusion, Naruto rolled his eyes in comical annoyance. "Come on, I know it only made it to paperback, but still." Inoichi was still as confused as possible. This was an example of what he meant in the trial when he said Naruto's topics would bounce around sporadically. Now it seemed as if he were on a completely different subject altogether. Well, that's what he thought until Naruto explained further. "The biggest sin of a man at war is his undoubted belief in the enemy's words. It is a psychosomatic disadvantage of a human being who has seen enough tragedy to have faith in the things he hears that promise an end. If he is told of a possible end to war, regardless of where the information comes from, he will take it without question. A shinobi's duty is to resist such an urge." Inoichi Yamanaka, The Psychology of War. Naruto said. Inoichi's eyes widened ever so slightly when he realized what he was talking about. "You've read my book," he stated in surprise. Surprise because it was never very popular to those who weren't studying psychology. It was far from being a bestseller. "I did," Naruto said, nodding his head. "A true masterpiece it was." Inoichi raised an eyebrow, not expecting a compliment. "Well, thank you. But I don't believe that applies to this situation. We're not at war, aren't we?" Naruto responded immediately. "Call it what you will, but this is war. Two sides facing off in a battle to gain the upper hand or maintain it. That is the goal here, right?" he asked, upholding that same unsettling eye contact. "I mean, your expert evaluation of me is that I am a psychopath. Someone who loves being in control," he mocked. Inoichi was starting to feel a bit anxious as he just got that sickening feeling that Naruto was more than a few steps ahead of him. His many years of doing this, however, gave nothing away, and he met the Ritide's eye contact with a stoic look that was unshaken. Coughing into his hand, he replied. "Yes, but I am not here to compete with you." "Oh, but you are. You are here for just that reason. You see, this little game of ours has the ultimate objective of control. We're in your facility. You control all things within. Patients, workers, the lights and whatnot." Naruto rhetorically asked him, receiving a nod of confirmation. "Yeah, well, as hard as you may try and hide it, I can tell I threaten you." Inoichi chuckled a bit as a way to demean Naruto's statement when in truth he wasn't feeling too confident. "No, I do," he accented calmly. Inoichi sat back in his seat with a forced grin on his face. "And how is that?" he asked him. Naruto blinked in thought. "Well, you are no match for me physically, and you know that. All those years of war and you couldn't beat me if you left me in this straitjacket. You know this, so you have to come up with some other method of beating me. You want to assert your dominance by displaying your prowess in something that only a handful of men have been able to best you at, mental prowess." Inoichi's full smirk of confidence unintentionally dropped by the end of Naruto's rant. "But now you're starting to truly worry. Because I'm beating you at that as well. Is that not what war is about? Gaining the tactical advantage over your enemy in all aspects of the fight. As I am sure you're aware, you are not the first man to depict war from a mental standpoint," he asked again rhetorically. "Of course," Inoichi said, nodding. "Do you know about Wakata Fuji?" Naruto asked. Inoichi wanted to say yes, but he knew the types of quarters you could be backed into when lying to someone as intelligent as Naruto, so instead he shook his head. Naruto nodded and continued. "Well, he was a general of Kurigakure during the Second Great Shinobi War. He wrote a book titled, It's a Mind Game. What the book was about was basically the mental strain put on the mind of a man at war, much like yours. In his depiction, he explained it as being a process, a slow process, much like working on a patient," he said with a shrug. Inoichi was listening intently, actually interested in what he was saying. When war begins. The first step is asserting your dominance, making the opposing side more timid to attack. That was your intention when coming here today. You may not have known it, but it was. It is what you would call a tactless objective. It was planned out without even truly thinking about it. It's actually a fairly blatant example of the good guy bad guy complex really. He said with a chuckle. How is that exactly? Inoichi asked in reply. Wow. Naruto said smiling as he shook his head. You really don't see it. Well, you woke up this morning. Thinking about this moment. In anticipation, your mind simplified the situation. There are two men here, one good one bad. He nodded his way as if he were talking to a child. In your mind, you went over various scenarios and mentally planned out how you wanted it to go. You expected me to be much more aggressive than I am from the stories you've heard, or else you wouldn't have seen it fit to secure me with chains. He said leaning forward stretching out the metal links on his back. In doing so, you made a plan to make it clear to me who was in charge here. You're drawing this assumption from thin air. Inoichi said portentously. Oh, but I'm not. Naruto said almost as if he were singing. You see, from the very first question, you meant to demean my intelligence, expecting me to have a very rudimentary understanding of why I'm here. He mocked. Which I did. Your response was it's a little more complicated than that. Clear signifier. He said casually nodding his own head. Then you layer a sheet of emotional manipulation over top of it to make it seem as if you were on my side. A clever tactic that I am sure has worked on a ton of patients. Naruto was praised. But, even still. It's too elementary for a mental war of this level, and you know what they say about war. You never know who's winning until the end. He said with a smile. Do you think you're winning? Inoichi asked. Naruto only chuckled ominously. Oh ho ho, it is far from the end. He replied leaning back in his seat. Inoichi just stared at him, seeing him in a new light. From their last conversation, he was convinced Naruto was psychologically unhinged, but after this talk, he was getting a different vibe. He wasn't unhinged at all, psychotic yes, but unhinged. Not so much. For some reason, that just made things a lot worse. 4 years later, rubbing his temples, Minato signed another document, barely reading its content. His old age was starting to wear him down after all these years. Adding the drama of the constant arguments he was involved in, he was more than exhausted. 4 years was all it took to both amaze him and disappoint him all at the same time. Amazement coming from his two youngest children as they climbed the ranks bit by bit, owning up to their titles and respect within the village. They turned 18 a few months ago, which really made him realize how fast time was going by. It was like he blinked and they were fully grown and moving on with their lives. Years of fighting for their brother's freedom alongside their mother had eaten up the remainder of their youth. Oh yes, Naruto was still locked within the asylum, now with no possible way of getting out. The bitter pill that they all had to swallow. 2 years ago, they were just nearing a breaking point in which the council members were considering releasing the blonde, but with the world working against them, the veteran psychologist Inoichi entrusted with Naruto's sessions in his absence, committed suicide within his home after a conversation with him. The man's suicide note expressed an extreme urgency that Naruto was the most insane man he had ever worked on, and if he were to ever be released, it would only cause more destruction than it was worth. That was all it took for the members of the council to put their foot down at the wife of the Hokage and explain to her that under no circumstances was he ever going to be released, as he was too dangerous to ever step foot in civilized society. The entire Namikaze family was of course unhappy with the news, but the one who took it the hardest was Kushina. Mainly due to the events that happened after the council gave her that ultimatum. She agreed she would not bring the trial up again if she got to see him one last time. They agreed to her request and she went the next morning. When she got there and signed in, giddy and heartbroken about seeing her son for the first time in years, but the last time forever. What broke her heart completely was when Inoichi told her he wasn't taking visitors. When she demanded that it was an order from the council to let her see him, Inoichi clarified he knew as he was there too. Restating his previous statement, he told her Naruto refused to see her. Kushina at that moment knew without a doubt she was a failure as a mother. She linked his reasoning to the neglect they put him through all those years ago. Convincing herself that he was just suppressing his emotions all along and that he truly hated them. She spiraled into a very deep depression that consumed her life for over a year. It was only the previous year that she was finally able to pull herself back up and stand on her own 2 feet, in part due to their growing family. Menma, now an ANBU operative, realized somewhere along the line how precious life was. After losing people close to him, he understood how short it could be, so he and his girlfriend, Sakura Haruno, decided that they wanted to be together forever, for as long as that forever was at least. So, they married at the age of 17. It was the needed bit of joy that was finally able to pull Kushina out of her rut even just a little. Then even further with the news of her pregnancy. Adding to that, the official relationship of Mito Namikaze and Sasuke Uchiha brought her joy as well. She couldn't be involved in one of her children's lives, but she still had two that were moving on and doing wonderful things. Her heart stung every time she thought of Naruto, but she knew he was as good as gone now, and she had no one to blame but herself. But if she dwelled on the past, then she'd miss out on the present and she'd be blind to the future. Minato was glad to see his wife back to her old self at last. He felt happy to see a sliver of things looking up for them after 4 long years. His heart still aches every day with the thought of his oldest son though. As a father, he felt that he failed him. Had he been there to guide Naruto from the beginning, maybe his progress would have been a bit slower, but he would have had the chance to be a kid. If that happened, maybe he never would have had that run-in with the Snake Sannin, and maybe they'd still be a perfect family. At this point, he was living off of those so-called what-if fantasies. Dreaming of them as hard as he could, as if that would be enough to fix his wrongdoings. Unlike Kushina, Minato was much better at hiding his pain. Of course, he had continuous piles of work to distract him as well. But the issue with that is that, when you appear strong, no one tries to help you. No one cared to ask him how he felt about losing a son. During Naruto's trials, he was told he could have no say during the actual session, as his word carried too much weight. Minato, more than once, had the thought of saying fuck it and just demanding his release, but as a Hokage in times of peace, he knew doing that would result in problems for the village. When most of the clan heads and the entire civilian council were against Naruto's freedom, he knew their response would have been as drastic as his thought of the Uchiha clan, packing their things and leaving the village. He knew it would cripple the village immensely. As a father, he didn't care, but as a Kage, he had to. He had the rest of his family to think about as well. Konoha's enemies would jump at the opportunity to destroy them at any moment of weakness, so he had to sit by, watch the trial, and pray for the best. The best never came of course, so now, he was fulfilling his duties as a Hokage, a husband, a father for his remaining two, and a future grandfather. Naruto would just be another painful memory he had every time he shut his eyes. His greatest regret in life, and his most heartbreaking failure. In time, he hoped he would be able to see him once more before his time was up, but he doubted it. With his status as Hokage, of course he had special clearance to visit him as he wished and he had tried before, but Inoichi said Naruto adamantly refused to see him, threatening violence if he was forced. It was a slap to the face of course, and he couldn't understand why, but he didn't have to. If Naruto was happier living in solitude, then he was not going to force him to do anything. It still hurts like hell though. Signing off on the last document for the day, he leaned back into his chair with a sigh. Rolling out his neck, he turned his seat around to look out at the night sky, losing himself in thought. Thoughts of finally retiring so that he could finally spend some time with his family. It seemed all of his peers were doing so nowadays. Shikaku, Inoichi, and hell even Fugaku was getting ready to pass the strings over to Sasuke. But he wasn't ready to hand the hat down to his son just yet. In other words, Menma wasn't ready. He had just made it into ANBU last year, so he was still learning how to follow orders. He was a long way away from giving them though. Maybe Kakashi. He thought with a chuckle, mentally imagining the silver-haired Jonin's protests. Sighing in content one last time, he got to his feet and left his office for the night. Ready to get home to his wife and put his worried mind at ease. The asylum, still drenched in its white interior design, was seeing the most excitement it had all day as Ino Yamanaka, the 18-year-old doctor, a chip off the old block from her father, stood at the front desk requesting another patient. The skinny man behind it adamantly tried to tell her there were no more as they were all booked. "There is no freaking way," she yelled out incredulously. The man shook his head somberly. "I am truly sorry Dr. Yamanaka, but they were all cleaned out this morning. Ibiki-san made sure they were all dealt with for the coming month," he said. "Yeah, he said he'd save one for me," she said in anger. The man just shrugged his shoulders looking around. There were no more clipboards left. This was her second week and it was already off to a bad start. Last week was her first time stepping foot in this place, but it got cut short thanks to an impromptu mission that required her abilities. This had been her goal for years. Her father would never let her come with him to even scout the place as he said it wasn't her time to be there. He wouldn't even talk about the cases as that would violate the doctor-patient confidentiality rule. Now that she was here, she was determined to prove herself an adequate psychologist. Inoichi had tried to keep her from the profession by telling her she was just too delicate to deal with those crazy people within. At first she was inclined to agree with him until he accented his statement by telling her she'd be better off working in the flower shop, picking daisies and whatnot. That was not something you said to Ino Yamanaka. How dare he demean her prowess as a kunoichi like that? She told him she was going to a psychologist whether he helped her or not. So, she took off in her pursuit to prove him wrong for what he said, and after a few weeks, her rage-filled journey to attest his belittling statement slowly turned into her new passion. She wanted to help these people that were in there for varying reasons. That's all she wanted to do was help them. It's been 2 weeks since she received her official status as a psychiatric doctor and she had yet to have a true case. She had 2 last week that were laughably easy, so much so that she'd have believed the men were faking the entire time. She wanted something that would test her skill and prove her father wrong at the same time. That's when her eyes landed on one more clipboard in the far back of the administrative office, her trained eyes locked onto it. The man turned towards it, unsure of whose it was as well. He walked back over to it and pulled it from the basket it was in. He read its content over, unsure why it was put in the back room like that. Reading the date it was last filled out, he gave a low whoa upon impulse. Eno waited patiently for him to tell her what it was until she ran out. What is it? It's an older case. Man, look at this rap sheet. He said looking at the list of highly respected doctors that had worked on it. Hey, I think your father worked on this one. He said walking back over to her. Guess he had no luck either. Eno snatched the clipboard from his hands and looked at the section he was talking about, not even glancing at the top. There were a ton of people she knew from her father to even Anko. The name that caught her eye immediately however was the very last one. Dr. Uneo Yager, the man who committed suicide 2 years back. Meaning, this was his last case. The case that pushed him over the edge. Her heart dropped almost immediately when she read the name Naruto Namikaze plastered at the top of the form. Maybe it was in the back for a reason. The man said looking at the reactions play out on her face. When he didn't receive a reply, he tried to reach out and grab it from her. Here, I'll do. No. She yelled a little louder than she meant to. Seeing his weird expression, she shook her head a bit before calming down. I mean, no, I'll take the case. She said as she placed it down on the counter and scribbled her signature beneath Dr. Yager's. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy it. If you want the next part of this video, turn on that bell notification. Like, subscribe and comment down below. And also check out the others' videos. I have created and enjoyed it. See you guys next video. So hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto is neglected by his family and becomes ANBU Black Ops. Part 4. If you guys enjoy this, what if, and you want the next part of this video, comment down below. And let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And also share this video with your friends. And check out the description. And check out my playlist. So let's start the video. Chapter 6. Leaving the asylum with a lot of questions racking her mind, Eno strolled into town, ignoring the various catcalls and greetings she received on a daily basis. Her brain was working overtime trying to make sense of things. She knew Mito's brother had gotten locked up years ago, but why was he in the asylum? Her one and only crush from all those years ago was now in a madhouse, and he seemed to be the worst patient there. Her childhood crush of course died off over the years, but it was just a strange concept to her for some reason. She thought about all the names written on his form. All of them were very good psychologists, and they were unable to help this one patient. Her dad and Ibiki were the two most prominent names there of course, as her father was a genius who she has never seen fail, and Ibiki because he wasn't even a psychologist. Why have a decorated interrogator with no knowledge of the subject try his hand at helping a patient that her father couldn't help? Same case with Anko, she was far from a caring person, which is what they needed. It didn't make sense, it was like they were trying to subdue him into sanity or something. With a goal in mind, she vowed to get answers from her father later on tonight when she went over for dinner. On her stroll through town, she heard her name being called from a distance. Standing at the door of a cafe was the very pregnant Sakura. Hey. Eno. Over here. Changing her direction, she walked over and greeted her. Hey, what are you doing out and about? She asked her to jog. I'm just having tea with Tenten. She said as they entered the cafe and joined the girl with 2 buns in her hair. Hey Eno, Tenten said with a wave as she stirred her cup of coffee around with intense focus. Hi Tenten, it's been a while. She said with a sigh. That's for sure. Sakura added with a smile. Eno looked at the girl's stomach in astonishment. Wow. You're getting so big. She said with a smile. How many months are you? Sakura smiled at her, taking it as a compliment. 6 months already. I can just feel her kicking me all day and night. She said, rubbing her stomach. Eno smiled at her, rubbing it as well. I am not looking forward to that. Tenten said with a chuckle. Sakura glanced over to her. Aw, you and Niji are already planning. She mocked her. Tenten's eyes shot open with urgency. What? No. Where'd you know? Muttered out urgently. Eno and Sakura shared a laugh at her misfortune as she blushed in embarrassment. Ah Tenten. Eno said within a sigh of relief. I miss you guys. Well, you're the one who's been ducking out on everyone. Always studying or taking missions. Sakura said. Yeah, weren't you going for your psychiatric license or something? How'd that go? Tenten asked. Eno smiled and pulled her badge from her pouch. Read it and weep ladies. she said. Sakura and Tenten squealed quietly in excitement for the blonde. Dr. Ino. Paging Dr. Ino. Sakura mocked. Ino shrugged her shoulders with a beaming smile, not even addressing the joke. I know, I'm amazing. She said in false arrogance. Ino, that's really cool. So what, you can tell what a person is thinking. Just by their body language and speech patterns. Tenten asked, given her limited knowledge on the subject. Ino only chuckled, well, it's a little more complicated. But yeah, it's something like that. That really is cool, Ino. Sakura said, nodding her head. That's amazing. Now you're a double threat. She said, giving the girl a thumbs up and a smile. Brains and beauty. All in one package. Ino smiled and flipped her hair dramatically. Have I ever been anything less? Sakura and Tenten looked at each other, clearly implying she had, well the two quipped simultaneously inciting a screw you guys and a round of laughter from the whole table. When they calmed down, they settled into a brief silence in which they drank the drinks that were placed in front of them. Tenten finally broke the silence. Seriously though Ino, you should definitely get you a man. She said suddenly. Ino gave her a weird look, really wondering where it was this conversation came up from. I think I'm fine for now. She replied. She's right Ino. I mean, we're 18. Most people in our profession don't make it this far. We're all very lucky. Sakura said. You shouldn't waste the opportunity. Ino nodded her head slowly. I understand that. And God, you sound like my mother. She said rubbing her temples in annoyance. I'm just not ready for that kind of commitment right now. Tenten just felt like riling the girl up a bit. So with a mischievous smile creeping up on her face, she asked, "Aw. What's wrong? Little Miss Princess can't get a date." Ino only chuckled at the sad attempt. Please, I could have any guy I want. Problem is, I don't want any of them here. Why not? There are some really cute guys in Konoha nowadays. Sakura said. Ino leaned back in her seat. Oh yes, tons of cute guys that just expect me to be some dumb blonde bimbo who wouldn't know her own hand if she stuck it out in front of her. She said a little angrily. Ah, so they all think you're dumb? Tenten asked. Is that why you were doing the whole psychiatry thing? What? She exclaimed. No. I'm just saying. Every guy I meet tries to treat me like I'm nothing more than a pretty face who shouldn't be allowed to work in fear of damaging perfection. Actual words from the last guy I tried to date. Aw, well that just seems like he was trying to be nice. Sakura said in sympathy. Ino snorted. No. Because then he said, if you were my wife, you would never go out into the field again. Pretty girls like you don't last too long out there anyways. She said, mocking a deep man's voice as best she could. Oh, yeah. That's a jerk. Tenten said. Konoha has a lot of guys like that, but we've also got guys that are genuinely sweet. Sakura said in joy. And I've got the best one. She said thinking about Menma while Tenten and Ino made fake puking gestures while her eyes were closed and laughed about it when she opened them wondering what happened. Okay Sakura. Tenten said. We get it, you've got the Prince of Konoha. For the rest of us though, it's hard. Not for me of course. I've got my Niji. I meant Ino. She clarified. Gee thanks Tenten. Ino said with a deadpan look. Look guys, I'll be fine. I just need time to adjust to my profession. Who knows, maybe I'll meet someone at work. She said. Ah, of course. Sakura said a little too happy. You'll fall in love with one of your coworkers who can see how smart and beautiful you are. She cooed. Tenten seemed to get the picture as well, and she smiled. Oh. That would be so cute. She said with a smile. Ino just rolled her eyes at the two ridiculous girls coming up with her own love story, as if they were plotting a romantic movie. Yeah okay Sakura she said with a chuckle of her own. Sitting in his room doing push-up after push-up, Naruto stared at the white wall with a blank expression. His white shirt discarded somewhere within his barren room. His breathing is steady and unaltered from his activity. Every rep is done with ease. His mind was lost in thoughts that bounced around sporadically. He had no idea how long he had been trapped in this place. His last session was years ago. He didn't know how many, but he knew it was more than one. He hadn't seen another human being since then. The most he got was when a guard came by and pushed his tray of food through the slot at the bottom of the door. Other than that, isolation was his life. The walls of white that surrounded him had driven him crazy long ago. He had tried all he could to escape this place, but it was impossible with him being inside his room every hour of every day. His last session was his last chance to escape and he tried to get the help of Dr. Yeager, but the man was too weak-minded for him to manipulate. He pushed too hard too fast and lost him. That was his last chance and he regretted his urgency. Naruto was certain at this point that he would die in this room. He would die as he lived, alone. The world was truly intent on screwing him over until the very end. His whole life had been the setup and this isolation was the punchline. The bitter cruel punchline. A punchline that he would fight till the very end. He wasn't ready to die just yet, he had things to do. Ending his workout routine, he laid on his mat and stared at his ceiling. A task he's done so many times it was unbearable. When you're alone all the time, you learn a lot about yourself and what you want to do. 2 years left Naruto enough time to know exactly what he wanted. He didn't want to make it out of there so that he could rejoin his family, no, he was too far gone for that. He didn't want revenge on the people that put him in there, that was too unnecessary of a task. Why dwell on the tools of your enemy? It wasn't the Uchiha clan or the council that was to blame for his suffering. It wasn't his father or Orochimaru, it was life in general. Life was laughing at him, so he would return the favor and laugh at all of life and the people who enjoyed it. Whomever happened to be in his path, he would cut down to do so. Whether it be his old friends or family, it wouldn't matter. He had a goal, a mission. No longer was he a soldier of the Leaf Village. Or a shinobi even. Naruto Namikaze was an agent of chaos, and he would get them to see that the world they are living in is nothing but an illusion. Everyone was quick to demonize him when he was at his worst, so he would see how they reacted when they were at theirs. All he needed was a way out. Patience was key in this situation. Patience and luck, and he had time to spare. Sitting at the dinner table, Ino twiddled her chopsticks around the plate her mother, Kiori, had prepared for her. Her father sat on the other side listening to her mother talk of some event that happened to her today while working at the flower shop. Inoichi himself was far from interested but listened to his wife regardless. As a husband it was his duty. Ino was still lost in the thought of her first true session that was set to take place tomorrow morning. It was nerve-wracking to think about. What if she failed? What if she wasn't able to help him? Would that make her a failure? If her own father couldn't even do it, could she just rationalize that he was just unsalvageable and just be done with it? Odd, she was already coming up with excuses for why she failed. That wasn't a good sign. No, she would attack this task just as she had the previous week, with courage and professionality. Still, it couldn't have been a worse person. Naruto Namikaze had been the first and only person Ino has had a genuine crush on. Sure, she fawned over Sasuke in the past when he was the guy every girl wanted, but that was just her younger self's attempt at maintaining popularity. When she was younger, she was all about presentation. Because, the way you presented yourself meant absolutely everything in the social world. Standing out meant being different, and being different got you laughed at. It was a simple formula that is understood by even children. Ino knew it better than anyone, and she knew how to manipulate it to suit her best. That was why she was good friends with Mito. Because Mito and Menma were outside of such a formula. Their village-wide popularity transferred to the classrooms and playgrounds without them doing anything. They were loved, and if you were friends with one of them, then you were loved. That's what her reasoning was when she was younger, but in truth, it was the boy she had seen and fallen in love with years before she even met the two. Fallen in love used loosely of course as she was only 5. 5 years old and she witnessed this 9-year-old genin boy rescuing her cat that was stuck in a tree. Cliché of course, but to her 5-year-old self, it was the most amazing thing she had seen. She didn't even ask him to. When she ran to find help, she returned to see him walking up the tree with no hands. Which was a big thing for her at the time. He brought the cat down and petted it a few times before setting it free. Just a random act of kindness. The cat ran back to her, rubbing its body on her leg, but she watched that 9-year-old boy walk away until she could no longer see him. Thinking about how cool he looked and how nice he must have been to just randomly save a cat. At that moment, her crush sprang to life even though she had never spoken to him. She would however see him walking around the village when she went out with her mom. He never noticed her though of course, as he wasn't interested in 5-year-olds. Meeting him at her 10th birthday party was the best day of her life. The thought of how ridiculous the start of her first crush came about always made her smile. It was a sign of pure innocence on her part and it made her realize how much things have changed. Now girls, including herself, fell in love with a guy who could do something for them. It was a sad truth but a truth nonetheless. Saving her cat from a tree wouldn't be enough this time around. Sometimes she wished it was. Ino dear. Kiori said, getting her attention. Are you alright? Do you not like the food? Ino shook her head to focus back into the conversation. No mom. I was just thinking about it. She said, taking a bite to reassure her. You okay? Inoichi asked, noticing how spaced out she seemed. She nodded her head vigorously. I was just thinking. She repeated. Her mother got a mischievous smile. Ooh, was it about a boy? She said in amusement. Ino rolled her eyes. No, Kasan. She said. What boy? Inoichi asked, comically aggressive. There's no boy Tusan. Your wife is just drunk. She said with a chuckle as her mother just mocked her laugh and took another sip of her wine. 2 glasses, I've only had 2. She said with a grin. Inoichi just chuckled at the woman before looking back at Ino. Too many. He said jokingly as he and Ino chuckled at her misfortune. She just hummed a song over their laughter before heading back to the kitchen to fetch the dessert. Suo. He said, drawing her attention back. Will there ever be a boy? He asked. Hopefully. Ino raised an eyebrow at that. Why? She asked timidly. Inoichi shrugged his shoulders, shoveling another piece of food into his mouth. I don't know. I mean, you don't want to wait too long, you know. He said. Dusan? She said timidly. Are you saying I need a boyfriend? She asked him cautiously. No, of course not. He said quickly so that she didn't get the wrong idea. No, I'm not saying you need one. I'm just saying, if you wait too long, it may be too late. Odd, I'm getting this talk from you too. She asked in exasperation. At that moment, her mother walked back in with the dessert in her hands. Tusan, I'd really rather work on establishing myself in my profession first before I think about all of that. Ino's mother buds in. Are you guys talking about your new patient? She asked. Fuck, Ino thought. She was hoping to wait till a bit later before she told her dad. She told her mom earlier that day. Inoichi was curious now. New patient? He asked. Geez, what is that? 3 now? He asked her. Ino nodded with a smile, hoping he didn't ask more questions. Against her as always, he pressed on. Wow, you'll break records working like that. Then the inevitable. Who is it? Ino paused, she was unsure of how her father would feel about her taking on a case that was clearly dangerous. She was timid because she hadn't told her mother the name either. She could always lie, but with his connections within the asylum, it would probably get back around to him anyways. Figuring she had nothing to lose from it, she spit it out. It's damn it, she paused. She could see the worry rise up on his face. It's Naruto Namikaze. The room fell completely silent. So silent you could probably hear someone blink in the other room. Inoichi was just staring at Ino, his face set in a completely stoic expression. Ino met his eye contact with a bashful look that refused to back down. Kiori was shocked as well and was looking back and forth between the two, worrying about rising up in the pit of her stomach. Inoichi slowly began shaking his head as he sat back in his seat. He said, shaking his head more vigorously. Dusan, I know what yo dot. Nope. Dusa dot. No. Look I dot. No Ino. Find another patient. He said, trying to keep calm. She chuckled. Tusan, there are no other patient dot. No. He yelled out. Kiori was trying to calm the two down, but was being ignored by both. Not one to be outdone, Ino got over her shock. What the hell do you mean no? I can dot. No way in hell. He said over Ino's attempts at explaining. I can handle this. She yelled out, standing to her feet and leaning on the table in anger. Inoichi got to his feet as well. You don't know what the hell you're doing. Yes I do. I'm a licensed doctor. She yelled. No Ino. You're not doing it. He yelled out. Yes. I am. She yelled back. I said no. This one stopped them in their tracks, the entire room retreated into silence again. They had never seen him so angry before. Inoichi plopped back down into his chair and rubbed his eyes, trying to calm down. Ino. He's not. He is not a regular patient. Okay, he is far from being someone you can handle. Dusan, I'm better than you thought. Ino. He yelled, hitting the table, making her fold back into her chair. Me. He said slowly so that she could understand. You don't know what he is. He is out of your league completely. He finished, letting the statement hang in the air for her to understand. Ino's arms were folded over her chest as she stared at the table waiting for him to finish. When he didn't say anything further, she looked up to him with an annoyed expression. Can I talk now? She asked rhetorically. Inoichi didn't say anything so she took it as a yes. Tusan, I am a grown woman. I am going to do this. Because I know I can help him. She said slowly, nodding her head at him. Ino. He said solemnly. You're right. You are a grown woman and I have no authority over you. But, as your father, I am begging you. He said on the verge of tears, shocking both his wife and daughter. Please. Don't do this. Ino's heart was breaking bit by bit with each word he spoke. She couldn't describe it, but she just felt as though she just had to do this. It was a compelling feeling in her heart that told her if she didn't she'd regret it for the rest of her life. So, even though it would break his heart right now, when she finally cured Namikaze, he would see that she did the right thing. Tusan. I know you won't understand right now. But I have to do this. Inoichi sighed and rubbed the tears from his eyes. He looked back into her fiery eyes and could tell just from the look she was giving that she had absolutely no intentions of changing her mind. That being said, he had no words for her. He shook his head and apologized on his way out the room. Fiori called out to him, but he continued on his way, leaving the two at the table with the uneaten dessert. Ino's own eyes were watering, knowing she was hurting her father. Kiori moved her seat next to Ino's. Sitting down, she wrapped an arm around her and rubbed her shoulder. Hey, don't worry about him. Your father just worries for you. Ino sniffled and wiped her eyes. He just needs some time. Okay. Ino nodded into her shoulder. It would take time, but he would be alright. She just had to give him time. Sitting at the metal table with the light hanging over the top, Ino straightened the documents out in front of her. She was trying hard to get her breath under control. Her hands refused to stop shaking. She had on her lab coat over a purple blouse and a black skirt. Her hair set up in a loose bun on top of her head and her usual bang tucked behind her ear. She was waiting for her patient, truly considering turning back now. No, she had to do this. She just had to. Blowing out the breath caught in her throat, she lowly whispered words of encouragement to herself as she tried to go over her game plan for this session. First thing she had to do was understand where he is mentally. What his daily thought process looked like. She had to do so without letting him get the upper hand on her, which was something Ibiki warned her about, saying with him it was definitely a possibility. Her heartbeat was noticeably faster than it should be, and she continued to straighten the documents on her desk as a way to pass the time. Every time she heard footsteps coming down the hall, she steadied herself only to be let down when they continued past the room. This time however, there was an added sound of chains jingling as well, for some reason, she knew it was him. Slowly, the door opened up and one of the guards stepped in first, nodding his head to the blonde. She nodded back, gulping down the lump in her throat. Finally, her patient entered the room, surprising her completely by his new appearance. Mainly because she was expecting a blonde. Instead, he walked in with his red shaggy hair bouncing around on his head. A muzzle secured around his mouth, a straitjacket tightly wrapped around his frame, and shackles hugging his ankles. His own blue eyes were locked onto her paler shades with a look she couldn't quite describe. With the mask on, it was hard to tell. The guard that sat him down took the chain from his belt line and hooked it into the back rings on Naruto's straitjacket, then hooked the ends to the hooks on the floor behind his chair, making sure it was secure. When that was done, he turned to Ino asking her if she needed anything else before they began. When she said no, he unlocked the muzzle around Naruto's face and removed it before exiting the room, informing Ino they would be right outside. Now, they were all alone and she could see his full expression. She could see it but still couldn't pinpoint what it was. It was like a mixture between excitement and hope. He had a small grin on his face and his intense stare hadn't left her since he walked in. Coughing into her hand, she straightened up. "Hello, Naruto. I am D. Dr. Ino Yamanaka," he said, drawing out her last name eerily. "So, you remember me?" she stated. His smile only grew. "You have a name tag." He nodded down to her chest where her ID badge dangled. Ino looked down at it with a bashful reply of "Oh. Of course," she said, whispering the last part slowly. Coughing into her hand again, she grabbed one of the documents from the table. "Okay. What we're gonna do?" she whispered slowly, avoiding his eye contact by reading the papers she had read 1,000 times over before this point. You're shaking." He teased, looking at the paper in her hand as it quivered and quacked in fear. Ino quickly gulped down the new lump that piled into her throat, whispering a sorry that he could barely hear. Naruto watched the woman fumble over herself and her words with excitement. This was definitely his chance. He could see it now, all he had to do was play his cards right. Better than he did with Dr. Yeager. Just by watching her, he could tell she was completely underqualified. Ino tucked her hands under the table to keep them from his view. Coughing yet again, she finally found some courage. I will be handling your sessions from now on. And I want to do my best to help you," she said. Naruto gave her a look as if he were judging the sincerity in her statement. I understand a few doctors before me have tried before." "Oh yes, they have." He nodded his head. "So, what makes you so different besides your pretty face?" he asked, flashing his cheeky grin. Ino grinned back and brushed off the compliment. "Well, I don't intend on quitting." Naruto chuckled. "Persistence is your angle." He started nodding his own head as if approving. "Well, I'd probably guess they didn't plan on quitting either." Ino brought a shaking hand up to secure her bang behind her ear and immediately put it back down. Naruto's eyes followed the appendage the whole way. "No, I doubt they did," she replied. His smile receded a bit. "Do I scare you, Dr. Yamanaka?" he asked her with a glint in his eyes. Ino was examining every inch of his face. Trying to convince herself that he didn't before she could try and convince him. Was it fear she felt? Or just anxiety? "No," she said flatly, trying to hold her composure. The way her eyes twitched in an effort to keep eye contact told him otherwise. Naruto's smile grew again in a psychotically innocent way. "Good," he quipped. "I don't want you to be afraid of me. I get enough of that around here." Step 1 of his plan, emotional manipulation. Ino was interested in that. This was her window to pry. "People are afraid of you?" she asked as if she didn't already know. In other words, she bit hard. Naruto's smile fell into an expression that rested somewhere between reminiscent and sad, then layered it with an obviously fake attempt at a half smile. "They've always been afraid of me," he said, zoning off. Is there a reason they should be? Ino asked. Naruto looked at her curiously. Well. I'm a bad person. People are usually afraid of the bad guy. Ino had no words. That was as true a statement as it could be. People are afraid of the bad guys. From his rap sheet, he was the worst of the worst, but she had to play the part to gain his trust. I don't think you're a bad guy. Naruto just stared at her, no smile, no emotion whatsoever. Then, he chuckled. Yeah, I doubt that. He said. I'm serious. You may have done some bad things in the past, but that doesn't make you a bad person. Well then. What makes one a bad person? He asked her, putting dramatic influence on bad person. Ino tucked her bang back before it fell loose again, this time her hand was steady which Naruto noticed. Well. She began. A bad person is someone who. She stopped to think about it. She had to say something that she knows he hasn't done. She didn't know him personally so she just had to guess. Someone who does bad things. And doesn't feel bad about doing those bad things. Naruto just stared at her, clearly not agreeing. He then leaned forward until the chain caught him. Dr. Yamanaka. You're a shinobi, right? He asked her suddenly. So this is what her father's notes meant by his tendency to jump around topics. She nodded her head. If I were to guess your rank. I'd say ANBU. She was a bit flattered by that, but shook her head. No, I only made it to Jonin. She said. He nodded his head. Well, even so. As a Jonin, I assume you've spent time in the field. He stated his question. She nodded in response. And this time in the field. I am willing to bet you have taken more than a few lives. He said. She paused now seeing where he was going with this. Why yes I have. So? Do you? He asked her suddenly. She gave him a look that said she didn't understand the question. Do you feel bad about taking those lives? She scratched her eyebrow in thought. No. She said. No, I don't. He gave her a confused look. Then that would make you a bad person as well? He asked her. Ino sighed, thinking about her answer. Well no. Not necessarily. She replied. But. You did something bad and you don't feel bad about it? He said looking at her as if she were an unfinished puzzle. Well, those people I killed were. Well, they were bad people. She said in haste. How bad is it? She again smoothed her pesky bang back before it fell again. They would have killed my friends if they had the chance. She said. But they were shinobi as well, right? He asked. She nodded her head. Soldiers. Following orders are considered bad people as well then? Then boy do I get news for you. He said, flashing her that cheeky grin. What would you consider a bad person? She asked him suddenly. He stopped to think about it. What do I consider a bad person? He leaned back and stared up at the light as if it had the answer written on it. Well, that's a bit of a tough one. You see, I personally believe that there are certain levels to the bad guy spectrum. He said, again accenting those two words. It is bad. There is corruption. And then there is evil. He said letting that ring for a moment. These bad individuals will inflict pain upon others and will know that what they are doing is wrong. Right. They will know it is wrong, but will continue to do so for various reasons, usually to protect something they care about or need to survive. Those are your robbers, your everyday murders, shinobi and whatnot. He nodded her way to make sure she understood. So, you believe shinobi are bad people? She asked him. Oh, the worst of the bad. They are someone's evil, which I will get to in a moment. He said. But then, there are people who will see an opportunity. They will see an opportunity to better themselves and will take it regardless if it would hurt others around them. They will know it will hurt someone, but will do it anyway, not out of spite for that person, just for the improvement of themselves and only themselves. People like Orochimaru for example. He nodded again. Ino raised an eyebrow at that. So, it was revenge on his mind. She couldn't know yet, she had to be sure. Orochimaru is a man who is rotten to the core. He wishes to better himself so he undergoes these horrendous crimes in order to do so. This man has murdered countless men, women and children, all for the sake of gaining more power. That in itself is corruption in its truest meaning. He explained. But, you wouldn't call that evil? She asked him. Naruto chuckled. Oh no. Evil is something that is completely different. You see, evil individuals. Well, they don't know they're evil. He explained. They believe wholeheartedly that they are righteous in their actions. So, in theory, an evil individual to you would probably believe you're evil. That's what I meant when I said a shinobi is somebody's evil. He said leaning back in his chair, finished with his rant. Ino really wanted to refute the Riti's theory, but damn, it was fairly accurate. It made more sense than just marking every individual that has ever wronged you an evil person. It brought a new perspective to her mind about the people she considered bad people. So, which one are you? She asked him. Naruto grinned. Well, that's what you're here to find out, right? He asked. Not gonna make it easy for me? She asked him with a grin of her own. He tilted his head from left to her with a thoughtful look. I could, but where's the fun in that? 3 days later, laying in her bed, Ino thought back to her conversation with Naruto. For the past 3 days, she has been wondering why everything he said made so much sense. It was unfathomable to think that she would actually agree with the philosophy of someone locked in a madhouse. It amazed her more so than anything. Amazing in the way that it had to be the most intellectual conversation she had ever had in her life. Of course, she only really got invested in her book smarts a little over a year ago, but still. Never before had she had a conversation like that. She actually questioned why her father didn't want her to do this. He once told her that the reason he enjoyed working at the asylum so much was because of the new viewpoints he would hear when talking to them. Claiming he believed some of them just saw life in a very different light than normal people do. Well, she definitely understood now. Naruto was like a book written by a scholar from another universe. His views on the world were so unique that he just made you want to listen. She couldn't understand how the Redeed wasn't his favorite patient at one point or another. She'd ask, but they weren't talking these days. When he came around, she would be sure to question him on what it was he and Naruto would talk about. Or, maybe if she got close enough, she could ask Naruto. Try and figure out what spooked him so much. Ino simply thought her father's fear for her working with him derived solely from the suicide of Dr. Yeager. Ino couldn't accept that. It was too outrageous to be true. She knew Dr. Yeager had done it after a few conversations with Naruto, but for a man as level-headed as he was, she doubted the Redeed himself was responsible for pushing him over the edge. There had to be something else going on in his life that pushed him to the edge of that abyss. Some people are just great at hiding their true feelings. With him being a veteran psychologist, Ino could guess he was better than most. Ino also knew Naruto was responsible for more than a few suicides within the prison, but she had to rationalize it logically. Those men were in a maximum security prison, possibly for life, meaning they were most likely already at the end of their rope. Listening to the pessimistic views of Naruto would have been the most unfortunate thing for them at the time. He was very convincing if nothing else. Checking the time, Ino sighed and stood to her feet. It was almost 6 o'clock. Meaning she should start getting ready. Tonight she was set up for a blind date with a guy Tenten had met a few days back. Apparently he was a wealthy merchant's oldest son or something. Tenten was very vague in her description. She really didn't want to go out tonight since she had just gotten back from a mission that afternoon and she had her second session with Naruto in the morning. But Tenten insisted that she needed this, so she figured she'd give the guy a chance. After showering, she picked out a form-fitting black dress that had one strap on her right shoulder and she picked out a pair of heels to match. She let her hair down for once and allowed her bang to cover her right eye. Then, she waited on her couch for the knock at her door. She waited. And waited. And waited until finally, 45 minutes late, there was a knock at her door. Standing up and sighing, she walked over deciding to just ignore it. Opening the door, a fairly attractive yet skinny guy stood there, leaning against her doorframe on his forearm, trying to look cool. He had shaggy brown hair that was casually pushed to the side and held there with a little bit of gel, black eyes that traveled her form in approval, and an unimpressive build that seemed as if he hadn't done a single push-up in years. His suit was nice though. Ino stared at him unimpressed as he pulled a rose from behind his back. "You must be Ino," he said with a smile. "My name is Hidori." Ino raised an eyebrow at him as she took the rose. "Thanks," she said, holding it up. She noticed it was one of the free roses from her mother's shop that was set there for the kids to take for their mothers and whatnot. It wasn't even real. "I'll just go put this in water real quick," she said, stepping back inside. He nodded at her and she shut the door. Leaning against it, she looked up to her ceiling, cursing Tenten out in her mind. She threw the rose in the trash can a few feet away and opened the door again. Stepping out, Hidori was still smiling at her. He held his arm out for her to grab onto his forearm. She turned around and locked her door before begrudgingly grabbing onto his outstretched appendage. Sitting at a table within the White Dragon, the most expensive restaurant in Konoha, Ino stared at Hidori as he tried to explain to the waitress that he wanted a different kind of wine that they just didn't have. "I am sorry sir, this is our most expensive," she said, holding it out to him. "Are you serious? Wow, I thought Konoha was a little more classy than this," he said under his breath, insulting both the waitress and Ino. The waitress looked over at Ino visually asking her if she was serious. Ino just sighed and shrugged her shoulders. "Well, you gonna stand there or pour it?" he asked her rudely. She just smiled and poured their glasses. When she walked away, Ino took a sip of the wine. Hidori looked at her apologetically as if he expected her to be offended by the taste. "I'm so sorry. Tenten told me this place was the best," he explained. Ino just raised her eyebrows. "It's better than anything I've ever had," she said, taking another sip of the wine. He chuckled as if it were a joke. "Are you serious? Oh wow, that's sad." Ino just shrugged her shoulders. "Fine dining isn't a luxury most shinobi villages have," she informed him. "Oh, I'd beg to differ," he said, smelling his glass of wine. "Kumo has this amazing restaurant called the Mountaintop and God. That place has the best scenery and high-class wine." Again, he whispered under his breath, "Not this shit." Ino was beyond annoyed at this point. "That sounds lovely," she remarked with a fake smile. "Oh, it was. I'll take you someday. Maybe for our honeymoon," he said slyly with a chuckle as he looked around for the waitress, missing the death glare she sent his way. "Hello. Excuse me?" he yelled to the waitress that sat them who was currently serving another table. Her smile dropped when she saw who called him. "She's helping someone," Ino informed him as if he were blind. Midori just shrugged his shoulders. "Don't worry about it. We're VIP. Hey. Yeah, we'd like to order." Ino was on the verge of kicking the shit out of this pretentious prick. Her hunger at that moment just so happened to outweigh her irritation, lucky for him. The waitress came up with a stoic expression. "May I take your order?" she asked, pulling out her notepad. "Well, I mean if you're not too busy," he said sarcastically, holding up the menu. The waitress rolled her eyes when he was no longer looking. "Okay, well I'll have the shrimp platter, hopefully that's edible," he joked. Ino sighed in frustration, again pulling up her menu ready to order. She ordered a plate of sushi and ignored the look of surprise from Hidori. "Wow, that's impressive," he said as the waitress walked away. "What? Ordering normally?" she asked. He smiled. "Nah, most girls that look like you don't really eat that much," he remarked. She mocked his smile with her own. "Yeah. Impressive." From there, the date continued in the same horrible way it had been going. Ino couldn't wait to get the food. She tried to at least make conversation with him so that he didn't patronize anyone else further. This man had to be the most uneducated person she had ever met. If it wasn't about the trade market, he didn't know what she was talking about. To make matters worse, he had the audacity to insult her intelligence when she told him she was a psychiatrist. Just before she got ready to slap the shit out of him, the waitress returned, having read her mind. "Here you go, sir," she said, handing him his plate of food. He was confused when she handed Ino a to-go box. "I took the liberty of packing your stuff, ma'am," she said with a wink. Midori gave the girl a confused look until Ino stood up. "You are a lifesaver," she said, pulling out a big tip for the girl. "Thank you so much," she said, hugging her. Hidori was so confused when Ino walked around the table and slapped him in the side of the head hard enough to jerk his head to the side. "Ah. What the hell?" he yelled out as she walked away. "Goddamn, you bitch," he said under his breath. Another hand jerked his hand the other way. "Ah." The waitress looked at him daringly. "What the hell is wrong with you? Where is the owner?" he yelled out, getting to his feet, trying to threaten her. Soon, a big man in a business suit walked out of the back room to deal with the commotion he heard. Midori gave the waitress an angry look that promised her she was going to get fired. She only smirked at him until she heard the man call out. "What is going on out here?" he demanded, walking over to the table. Then, she began crying dramatically. "Daddy. He hit me," she yelled out, pointing at him. Midori began pleading his case, yelling to the surrounding customers who witnessed what happened. To his horror, they sided with the waitress, making up a ridiculous story that did not happen. Ino watched from the door with a smile before heading home. Thankfully, they got an amazingly convenient waitress. Chapter 7. Again, sitting at the metal table, Ino waited for the guard to finish securing Naruto to his seat. When he finished, he removed the muzzle from around his mouth before shutting the door, leaving the two to their second session. Ino smiled softly at him. She was still a little uncomfortable, but at the very least she wasn't as nervous. Naruto was smiling at her in a fake expression of surprise. "You came back," he quipped with the idea to show her that he was unsure she would. Ino raised an eyebrow. "I told you I would." Did he really think she wouldn't? "Oh yes, but many people have told me that." Ino nodded. "I'm sure. But, I meant it." He smiled at her as she began flipping through her notepad. "So, what's on the agenda today?" he asked her. "Just a few questions." Ino answered by reading a few lines. It was time for her to get a gauge on how this apparent psychosis affected him physically. "How are your dreams?" "Deep, dark, and viciously intoxicating," he answered instantly. She gave him a confused expression. "Would you care to elaborate?" Naruto sighed and looked up at the ceiling. "Well, there's not much to say. It's pretty self-explanatory," he said. "They are darker than most people would prefer. A little more nightmarish if you could see that." "So, nightmares?" she asked him. Naruto chuckled. "If you'd prefer that, then I suppose." He nodded. Ino nodded back, jotting a few notes down on the notepad. "Do these nightmares have any specific pattern or theme?" she asked. "No, I can't say they do." She nodded again and wrote more down. "Well, do you ever have happy dreams?" she asked him. Naruto chuckled. "Happy dreams?" he asked, putting emphasis on happiness as if it were the most ridiculous word he's ever heard. "Is that an actual term?" He asked her. What? Happiness? She asked. He nodded in confirmation. Well, of course it is. He smiled. You seem so sure of that. What is happiness for you then? Ino put her notepad down and tapped her pen on the desk and thought. Happiness is doing the things you like to do. With the people you enjoy being with. She said. I'm not sure I understand that. He admitted. Do you have an example? She thought over it. Well. Now that she was forced to think about it, she realized she really didn't do anything anymore that brought her joy. Ever since she began her psychiatric studies, she pretty much fell off of the social life she was accustomed to when she was younger. That day at the coffee shop with Sakura and Tenten was the first thing she had done with friends in years, but for some reason, she felt out of place. She felt different because of how shallow the conversation was. After so long of training with professionals whose job was to dig into deeper dialects, anything less was just rudimentary and agonizingly boring. She felt lost when talking to them of the simple things they were accustomed to. Talking of children and relationships and the normal gossip around the village, it was almost sickening that day, but she smiled through it nonetheless. Then, that same night at her parents' house, their conversation, aside from the argument, was shallow as well. Her mother, she understood, wouldn't have the mental prowess to delve into deeper conversation. But, her father she expected more from. Problem is he still sees her as a child, not a practiced psychiatrist, so he has no interest in talking with her in that way. In her studying, she found that depth in discussion is what brought her joy. When she returned to her life, she realized how shallow her everyday life is. Even her previous 2 patients, who were seen as normal patients, were too shallow-minded for her to actually have a conversation with. The only time she truly got her fix was right here. She looked up at the Redeed who smiled her way. They only just began their second session, and she realized he was the only person willing and able to bring about that feeling of happiness. She just realized how long she was taking to think over his question. She blinked away her thoughts. Well, like you and I are sessions. She said truthfully. So, this psychotic battle of 2 insane minds. He asked her with a grin. She was shocked by that. You think I'm insane? He smiled at her. Of course I do. You, Miss Yamanaka, have an amazing mind. And everyone knows that all great minds have just a touch of madness. He explained. For inspiration. That's nice. She complimented his words. Is that an original? He chuckled. I wish. No, I read something similar before. Can't remember where. But, it's true nonetheless. I suppose it's reasonable. She replied. Oh it is. He said, wiggling in his seat. Miss Yamanaka. Ino looked at him in questioning. What would be your idea of a perfect world? He asked curiously. She was shocked by the sudden question and thought over her answer. A perfect world? She asked, giving herself more time. Naruto nodded. Well. A perfect world in my opinion would be a world with no wars, no fighting, no killing, just good people, I guess. She replied. He looked at her strangely. The last time you were here, we spoke about what makes one a bad person, and I'd like to think I gave you a new perspective on it. He said. But, I'm curious now. In this perfect world of yours, what makes one a good person? He asked. Putting her on the spot again, she had to think about it. Well, it would be a generally good person. She said, giving a basic answer. Yes, but what would qualify? I mean, in this fictitious world of yours, you said there would be just good people. He said in a way mocking her word choice. She nodded her head, not fully understanding what he was trying to say. Yeah, so the people are just good people overall. She restated with a chuckle, not sure how else to put it. Redundant, but let me explain my take on what this so-called perfect world would be. Actually, I think we're close to it. He said. She gave him a confused look. The world right now? She asked in disbelief. He nodded his head. It's all about a simple concept of balance. You can't have this without that type of deal. He explained with a nod. No light without dark, no hot without cold. No good without bad. He said. How would that apply here? She asked. Well, think about it. What is a good man if he hasn't the option to be evil? There's a word for it. He nodded his head. Without the option to be evil, as is described in your impeccable world, a good person is just normal. And in a world with so many possibilities, normality is a sin. She nodded at the sound logic but wasn't satisfied just yet. Normality, as you call it, is also safe. She replied. He grinned. In a life so short, safety is but a handicap. A mental blockade that is triggered when in the face of danger. Natural fear of death for these civilized people, which is kind of ironic if you think about it. He said. Ironic in what way? She asked, wanting a little insight. Well. He began. It's just ironic how these sane individuals are so afraid of death and yet they live as if they are already there. She shook her head. I still don't follow. Naruto looked up and thought, trying to think of another way to put it. Well, think about fish in a stream. He nodded his head. Only the dead ones go with the flow. In a way, most of the people you see when you walk those village streets do the same thing almost absent-mindedly, as if they are already dead. So, you don't fear death? She asked him curiously. He tilted his head and eyed her strangely. How could I know? He asked. I haven't tried it. Ino chuckled at his joke. No doctor, I do not fear death because death is nothing more than the ending to suffering. In honesty I'd welcome it. He continued, getting serious. Ino looked at him strangely. So, you want to die? No, no, no. He said quickly. It's not a matter of being suicidal. No, it's just not wanting to live any longer. She was about to ask him what he meant by that, but he continued. I know how that sounds, but it's actually something completely different than what you'd expect. Suicide is described as taking your own life. That's not what I am looking to do. No, if death approaches me, I would welcome it. I do not plan on looking for it. He explained. Why is that? She asked. Do you feel content with life? Naruto cringed at the question as if it slapped him in the face. No, you see. That, doctor, is the problem. He said. If you simply feel content with life, then you're not living. If all you feel is that mediocre sense of enjoyment with the life you are given, then you ma'am are as good as a dead fish. How are you? Cope with the horrible things that happen in your life? She asked in complete bewilderment. This wasn't a question on the agenda, she just really wanted to know. Especially in a place like this. Naruto smiled at the look of awe in her eyes, whatever he was doing, it was working. Coping is of no issue. My mind is constantly changing and contorting in the most demented ways you could imagine. There are so many voices up here that life and the things that happen usually slip my fragile mind. Ino's smile was wide and filled with astonishment. That sounds amazing. It definitely has its upsides. He said with a smile at her glossy-eyed stare. Ino smiled and leaned back in her seat, thinking over his words. Although it took her a second to process what he was saying half the time, when she did, she sort of agreed, and it assured her that talking to Naruto was the best conversation she had throughout her days as of recently. It was refreshing to be able to talk to someone on your level of thinking, or in this case, far surpass her own. This whole ordeal was going too smoothly for anything that happened with the past doctors to be true. From what she was experiencing, Naruto was nothing more than a deep thinker. Yeah, he had a twisted view on society and some psychopathic tendencies, but he wasn't dangerous. Or maybe she just hadn't seen the worst in him yet. 2 months later, I don't know Menma. It didn't really work out the last time. Minato said, leaning back in his Hokage seat, starting over at his son dressed in his street clothes. Come on San. That was 2 years ago. He argued. I hate how incomplete the family feels. He said looking down. Minato sighed. Believe me, I get it. He remarked. But, digging all that up will upset your mother. She just got over the whole ordeal. Then don't tell her. He said, arguing his case. I just want to see him. I don't know, maybe tell him about my family and all. I would have to talk to his new psychiatrist to see how he's been doing. Minato said while he simultaneously shook his head as if telling him it wouldn't happen. New psychiatrist? I thought he wasn't taking sessions anymore. Minato nodded. Well, he wasn't up until a few weeks ago. Apparently someone took his case. Well, do you know who it is? He asked. He shook his head. No, I haven't had a chance to go and check up on things in a while. He admitted. Last time was about 3 or 4 months ago and he was still on lockdown. Well, if you hear anything then just let me know. He turned to leave before Minato called him back. Hey, hang on. About that other thing, well everyone seems to be on board. Shouldn't take more than another few months. He said, bringing a smile to the younger man's face. Menma chuckled as he walked closer to the door. Just make sure that paperwork is done by the old man. Minato chuckled and shook his head, ignoring the statement. Going back to his work, he thought over just how that conversation began. Basically, Menma wanted to visit Naruto before his daughter was born just to speak with him one last time. For what reason, he didn't know. It was a sudden request that he doubted would go over well, but would entertain it at the least. Signing off on another document, there was a knock at his door. Come in. He called out pushing the paper off to the side. Inoichi walked in looking worse for wear. Bags under his eyes, slouched shoulders, and an expression so downtrodden that it'd be hard not to notice. Minato. Hey. He called out to him slowly. Inoichi. Minato said, looking him up and down, noticing his disgruntled state. You look rough. He chuckled and took a seat in a chair off to the side. Yeah. He said hollowly. Silence settled in for a second. So, how can I help you? Minato asked cautiously. Inoichi sighed and thought about how he could answer that. Well, I have a request to make. He said, surprising him. Minato just waited for him to spit it out. I want you to I just want you to think it over. He said. What is it? Minato questioned, not liking the direction this conversation was headed. Inoichi stared out at the floor a few feet in front of him, deep in thought. He sighed a few times, finding this a lot harder than it seemed just a little while ago. What he was going to ask was something he himself wouldn't agree to if he were in the position. I want you to move Naruto back to the prison. Minato just stared at him in shock. What? He asked him. I want him moved back to the prison. He repeated as if he just hadn't heard him. Minato couldn't understand what was going on here. It didn't make any sense. Inoichi. You don't even work there anymore. He said. I am aware of that. He nodded his head. Minato just shook his head, still trying to think of a plausible reason for why the man wanted to do this. To his knowledge, Inoichi hasn't stepped foot in the asylum in years. So, what was the meaning of this outrageous request? I don't understand. Minato. Inoichi said, still looking out into the middle distance. I have not asked you for much in our long friendship. Now, I am begging you. Please. Minato shook his head at the desperate statement. Inoichi. You know I can't do that. He said, looking at him. Inoichi shook his head. Naruto's not right in the head. If we put him back in the prison, he would draw off. He can't stay at the asylum. Inoichi said. Minato still wasn't understanding. What brought this up? He wouldn't give an answer, he just shook his head again. He can't stay there. Minato sighed and stood to his feet. Look, come back in a few days, I'll have Ibiki here to explain his progress. We can make a decision then. He said. Inoichi shook his head yet again and stood to his feet, heading for the door, not turning around on his way out. Minato sighed and rubbed his head at the confusing turn of events. Sitting in his room, reading book after book, Naruto thought about all that had happened. He thought about how close he was to freedom. He could just feel how devoted Ino was becoming. From their conversations, he could see how she was changing day by day. It was she who requested they have longer sessions every day without him even asking. He technically hadn't asked for anything she did for him. She just sort of did it. He told her how boring his days are and how he used to read all the time. She got him books. He told her how the straitjacket would sometimes hurt his arms, she demanded the guard remove it in place of simple handcuffs instead. He told her that he liked her hair down and she left it that way. It was simple things that made him realize that on a subliminal level, she was willing to do things for him, and the more he pushed, the more he could ask for. Their recent conversations were becoming more and more personal. They spoke of everything that could be discussed on an intellectual level, and she expressed to Naruto that these deep conversations they had were all she enjoyed anymore. Knowing that, he spent his days of isolation planning the next theory he could explain for her or debate about. It was something to do besides staring at his padded walls all day. He noticed a change in her. She was slowly becoming more cynical in her thinking, a little more dark in her humor when they joke around. He also noticed how flirty she seemed to turn when the time allowed it. It was strange at first, but she always passed it off as a joke afterwards, so it wasn't much to bite off of. Not that he couldn't exploit that. And the slight chance that those random outbursts of playful affections were real, he would flirt back in hopes of moving this whole ordeal along a little quicker. Ino was at the edge of the cliff with her feet dangling over the ocean of insanity. With a little shove, she would fall in. Naruto had a plan to get out of here, and she played a big role in it. He just had to bid his time. It wouldn't be too long now. At the home of soon-to-be parents, Sakura and Menmanamikaze, Ino sat at the dining room table looking in on the group of people that identified themselves as her friends. It was an impromptu party that Tenten came to her house to retrieve her for earlier this morning. She sat in the corner seat of the dining room, watching everyone talk amongst themselves about random topics that didn't mean much. It was boring her to death. Around her were Tenten and Sakura, both bragging about their respective husbands, or soon-to-be in Tenten's case. It was as if they were in competition with each other over who had the more supportive man. They droned on and on about which of them was more efficient in the aspects of a good partner, as if it mattered in the slightest. Ino just sat in her seat, drinking the bottle of sake in her hand. She looked around the room, viewing everyone in there in a new light. Her conversations with Naruto brought a twist to the reality she's come to know in her lifetime. The friends she saw on a daily basis were a lot different than she remembered them being. They were the same, she just didn't view them the same. The ones she saw as confident and a little brash were now blind and idiotic. The shyer quiet ones were more aware of what life is. Regardless, they were all foolish in their ways of thinking and understanding. She honestly felt superior to everybody there, even the ones who could most likely kick her ass. In a mental battle before, no one could hold a candle to her, besides Shikamaru, mainly because of her family's specialist, but now it was much more than that. It was strange how much she could feel herself change in just 2 months, with the help of her redeeted patient. She felt like a completely different person. A good one or a bad, she didn't know yet. She knew she was changing though. As a psychiatrist, she was constantly keeping track of her own mental state as well, just out of habit. It was becoming so dark and twisted, and she knew it was. In a way, she felt like psychopathy was creeping up on her. She also knew the cause of it as well. Naruto was the root of her falling, but it was such an intoxicating feeling. It was like falling in love. A scary experience that she hoped had a happy ending. She was falling down, deep in a hole. Wink, her mind was starting to go and she could feel it. Ino would have been alarmed had it not had such an enticing endpoint. Having the chance to think in the same way as Naruto was something she wanted. If that meant psychopathy, then she was up for it. Hopefully it didn't come to that. Waking from her thoughts, she noticed she was now sitting at the table by herself. Sakura and Tenten left to find their significant others, as did everyone else apparently. She spotted couple after couple smooched up together around the house. They all smiled and had their own little conversations, mocking her while she sat in her seat alone, wishing she had that. Who would she have that with? Everyone that liked her was a complete idiot or a conceited asshole. Everyone she liked was. Well, she didn't really like anyone. To rephrase, she didn't really like anyone attainable for her. Ino wouldn't lie to herself. Naruto Namikaze had crept his way back into her heart with ease over their time together. It was like he never left. For the first time in a long time, she felt appreciated and needed. He spoke to her like she understood every word he said, even when sometimes she didn't. He treated her like she was better than these simple-minded civilized people even when she wasn't. He made her feel like she could be more than what she already is. How could she not fall for that? Sadly, that wasn't a type of crush she could run around telling her friends and parents about. She'd be taken off the case instantly. Maybe this is what her father was worried about. Maybe he knew of Naruto's charm and took a guess at how it would affect her. It was more likely he feared the possibility of her ending up like Dr. Jaeger. It seemed like a plausible fear to have, of course, with the extensive list of suicide victims caused by Naruto's influence. More importantly, it showed that her own father didn't even believe in her. If he thought so little of her abilities that he didn't trust her to not kill herself because of something that a patient said, then what good was he as a father? Ino. She jumped in shock as Tenten sat down next to her, looking at her in curiosity. What? She asked in irritation. Tenten gave her an amused expression. Geez, a little moody aren't we? Ino mocked her smile and took another drink of her sake. Why are you all alone? But the sigh, she asked, is it bothering you? Well, yeah. A little. Tenten replied. Are you mad or something? Why would I be mad? She asked. Because you're all alone over here and everyone else has a man to give them love and attention. She said in a joking manner. Ino didn't take it that way. She chuckled. Oh yeah. I totally wish I had a dim-witted guy to make out with at a party filled with idiots. She mocked with a fake smile. Tenten took that as Ino's version of a joke, but she decided to play along. Chuckling, she put a hand to her chest dramatically. Are you trying to call us idiots? No honey. I did. She said in a demeaning way with a tone one would use when explaining to a child. Tenten's smile faded slightly, trying to decide if she was actually joking or not. Brushing it off, she switched up the topic. You're a meanie. She exclaimed in her childish voice. Hey, what happened with that guy I set you up with? Ino gave her an irritated look and then looked away. Ignoring her question completely. Tenten was now truly feeling disrespected. Am I talking to myself? Ino sighed and brought the bottle back up to her mouth. Might as well be. She whispered into the bottle before taking another sip. Excuse me? She asked, truly not hearing what she said. Ino got tired of it as she was too drunk to continue listening to the girl's annoying voice. Downing the rest of the bottle, she exhaled and looked at the bun-haired girl. Look, Tenten. She began, slurring the words together. If I am being honest, I would much rather sit here in utter silence and complete isolation than to have to listen to your ridiculous rants about how great Neji is in everything he does. Tenten was about to argue, that's not WH. Yes, it is. Ino said, rolling her eyes. That's all you ever talk about. That's all you and Sakura ever talk about. It's the most eventful thing within your sad, dull little life, so you bring it up in almost every situation so that you can feel important for a few minutes every day. Then when you get the attention you so desperately crave to justify your own prominence, you act all bashful and humble, like you don't want all of that attention on you. It's really sad, Tenten, and I can guarantee you more than a few people have noticed, it's not just me. So, just save yourself some embarrassment and go back over there with your feminine man before he realizes he's gay and leaves you, or worse, slits his own throat in realization of how bitchy you actually are. Ino said, getting to her feet, planning on leaving, wobbling towards the door. Tenten remained in her spot with her mouth agape. She stared at Ino's retreating form, waiting for her to turn around and start laughing at that ridiculous joke. When she didn't, she got angry. Hey. Fuck you. She yelled out, getting the attention of the other guests. Ino sighed and turned to the girl. You're just a lonely bitch who can't find a boyfriend. What the hell gives you the right to talk down on anyone? Sakura, being a peacemaker, got to her feet as quickly as she could. Hey. She called out. What's going on? The two ignored her as they stared at each other. Tenten, I'm not talking down on you. I am making an observation. I don't blame you. You've lived your whole life believing in society's set standard of social acceptance, as have I. She admitted. But, unlike me, instead of standing out, you flew under the radar, not noticed in a negative or positive light. Now that you're older, you're starting to feel as though your younger years have all been a waste. So, you're having a sort of pre-midlife crisis in which you are searching for any form of appraisal you can receive from any corner you can receive it from. If that's what makes you feel like you matter, then by all means, do as you must. Ino responded smugly with half-lidded eyes, clearly intoxicated to some extent. Tenten was clearly steaming mad, and Niji got behind her, wrapping an arm around her waist, gently pulling her away. Fuck. You. You lonely, psychotic, bitch. She said, kicking off a slew of curse words that poured out of her mouth as she was dragged out of the back door by Niji and a few of the other former famous rookies, including Ino's own teammates. Ino? Sakura called her name cautiously. What's going on? Ino just smiled back at her as if she were walking on clouds. Oh nothing, Mrs. Namikaze. I'm peachy. She replied. Sakura shook her head, still hearing the horribly aggressive remarks flying out of Tenten's mouth from the backyard. Everyone else was quiet, most of them wanting to see what would happen. Menma, Sasuke, and Mito were the only two left sitting on the couch. Why would you say that to Tenten? She asked her. Well, I could have very well lied to her, possibly fed her with self-confidence, so that she could prance around this place like she's the best damn thing to touch this earth because of the guy she's with, but there's no healing in that. You've got to break a piece of the wall before you can fix the foundation, Sakura. She explained in her doctor's lingo. We've got to break walls. She slurred out in a harsh whisper dramatically. Sakura shook her head. Ino. That's your friend. We're your friends, not your patients. Sakura said as if she figured the blonde girl had amnesia or something. Ino laughed at that. Friends. Hahaha. She said laughing harder and harder. Are you fucking insane? She asked. Sakura was about to reply but was cut off. You've got to be fucking insane. Mito stood up from Sasuke's lap. Ino, what the hell is wrong with you? She asked, joining the fight. Mito. She said mockingly, eyeing the girl up and down. Gosh, how are you related to him? She whispered slowly, missing everyone's ears. Look, I don't know what the hell is wrong with you, but you need to go and apologize to Tenten, right now. The red-headed girl said in a threatening manner. Wow. Ino remarked. What a world we live in, huh? Where we actually have to apologize for speaking the truth. She said as if she were giving a speech. How ridiculous is that? We shouldn't lie to our friends. Mito remarked randomly, making the blonde drunk laugh harder and harder. Ino, stop. Sakura demanded. Oh no, Mito's right. Ino said suddenly. We shouldn't lie to our friends. She said pacing around the room. In fact, we should all apologize for lying to our friends. She said. Ino. Mito said daringly. She just smiled at her. Oh, you want to start, Mito? She asked. Go ahead and tell Sasuke your dirty little secret. I'm sure he'd love to know. She said, speaking of the Uchiha's interest. Mito continued staring Ino down with ill intent. Stop. Oh, but what kind of friend? Lies to another. A boyfriend at that. She said preposterously. Mito didn't say anything. What's she talking about, Mito? Sasuke demanded. Seeing his friend getting angry, Menma quickly stood to his feet to help. Ino, I think it's time for you to leave. He said standing in front of her. Ino's smile increased. And then, the kiss ass. She said happily with a giggle. Hey, if I leave now, you won't know Sakura's secrets. She chided. Menma hesitated slightly. We don't keep secrets. He said, pushing her gently towards the door. She only laughed as he basically picked her up off her feet and walked her to the front door. Before they got there she continued. Oh, I wouldn't be too sure, Sasuke-kun. Oops, she said cutely, clearly meaning to make that mistake. I mean, Menma. She then began laughing like a drunken psycho. Menma turned around, not sure what she meant by that, but to his luck, Shikamaru and Choji were jogging back into the house at the call of Mito to haul their teammate back to her home. They both noticed the utter tension and silence as they walked through, not wanting to get involved. God damn it, Ino. Shikamaru said, grabbing onto her. What the hell have you done? He asked as she just cackled sadistically. He and Choji hauled the girl off, leaving the house with a heavy atmosphere that was uncomfortable to sit in. The group of friends who showed up for a relaxing day of being together now had more than a few elephants in the room to discuss or ignore, depending on what they decided to do. 2 days later, Inoichi, I really don't understand your motive here. Minato said, leaning back in his chair with his hands on his head. Ibiki stood next to him waiting for an explanation as well. He had a hunch, but he wanted to be sure. Inoichi, still looking as bad as he did a few days ago, sighed and scratched his head. Look, I'm not gonna lie to you. He began. Ino is Naruto's new therapist," he said, shocking Minato. "Your daughter?" he asked. "Yeah. Minato, I mean no disrespect, but your son is nothing but trouble. Ino can't handle someone like him," he said, fully explaining the situation with as much desperation as he could muster up. Minato understood now and was about to reply until Ibiki jumped in. "On the contrary, Inoichi, I don't think anyone else can," he said, tossing the vanilla folder from his hands onto Minato's desk. He continued talking as Minato read over it. "Within the 2 months under Dr. Ino Yamanaka's care, Naruto Namikaze has shown incredible improvement. Statements from his guards report he has shown a significant decrease in aggression since he has been under her care. Dr. Yamanaka's reports show a periodical improvement in his behavior within his sessions as well. Removing him from that environment now would only cause him to fall back harder into that mental pit he was in when he arrived." Inoichi couldn't believe it. He hadn't seen his daughter since the night of their argument, but he had assumed that she'd be falling apart at this point. It's not that he had no faith in his daughter's abilities, it was just this particular patient. He couldn't last 2 months with the psycho, and now he's learning of Ino's strange effect on him. It was unbelievable. That can't be," he said in disbelief. Minato was surprised by what he was reading as well. "I mean, read it yourself," he said, passing over the folder. Inoichi read over Ino's report, which began exactly as he thought it would. One thing he noticed was how thick the packet was. There were hundreds of reports, but she was only assigned to him 2 months ago. "Why are there so many?" he asked aloud. Dr. Yamanaka requested multiple sessions every day after her second session. "I guess she saw something in him that sparked her need to help him," Ibiki said. Inoichi was seeing it himself. With every page he flipped, the reports got more and more positive. Even seeing it with his own eyes, he couldn't believe it. It wasn't real. He slowly began shaking his head. "No," he said slowly. Minato rubbed his face. "Inoichi. No, there has to be something. Some kind of motive for why he's doing this," he said, trying to rationalize this. "There's got to be a reason he's pretending to." "Inoichi." Ibiki interrupted him. "That's enough," he said simply, maintaining intense eye contact with the man to get his point across. "Look. I get it. You want to protect Ino, but she is not a little girl anymore," he said, shaking his head. "She is a capable and frankly brilliant psychiatrist. The asylum is under my command now, and as far as I'm concerned, Naruto Namikaze is getting the help he needs from one of the best and brightest of my staff. He has not done anything as of late that would be grounds for his dismissal," he stated with finality in his voice. Inoichi just shook his head and stared at the documents as if they weren't real. Minato stared at him, waiting for him to say something. When all he did was shake his head, he had to find something to tell him. "Inoichi. I don't know what to say." "What is there to say?" Inoichi asked, tossing the documents back onto his desk. He rubbed his eyes in irritation. "Sometimes things just don't work out," he said ominously before turning to the door. "I'm sorry, Minato," he said before opening the door to leave. Minato wasn't sure what he meant by that, hoping it was just meant as an apology for wasting his time. He didn't get a chance to tell him it was fine before he shut the door. Ibiki sighed. "I am sorry, Hokage-sama," he said. "I'll try and talk to him. He'll be alright." "Yeah," he said, looking down at his desk. "I understand." Ibiki nodded. "Just a man protecting his daughter. We'd all do the same if put in that position." Haha. Ino laughed out at something Naruto said as they sat in their usual session room. He chuckled along with her as well. Their latest session was coming to an end and it was informative for him. Ino was extremely ditzy today compared to how she usually is. It seemed like she just didn't care for the session anymore. Like she was more interested in joking around with him than trying to do her job. "That's so mean." "Haha. Tuckling," he responded. "It made you laugh," he said with a smile as she was still calming down from her fit of giggles. "Yeah, I guess so," she said, catching her breath and sighing in contentment. She stared at Naruto with stars in her eyes. Waiting for him to say something. All he did was smile back at her as if he were amused by her. "What?" she asked him. He shook his head. "Your smile is beguiling," he said. Ino bit her lips together and looked down at the table, trying to hide her blush. A knock at the door cut the moment short, signifying the end of their session. Naruto's smile faded away, as did Ino's. She gathered up the files and notepads she hadn't even touched in the session. I guess that's it," she said. "I'll be back tomorrow morning," she said, reassuring him as the guards came in to take him back. Naruto nodded and smiled at her. "I know," he said as they dragged him out the room. Ino finished packing up her stuff and headed for the door with a smile on her face and a warm feeling sitting in her chest. She couldn't wait for the next day. Break. Making it to his room, Naruto's cuffs were removed from his wrists and ankles. He didn't care to turn around and look at the guard shut his door. He just walked further into his room, planning on reading one of his books. But he stopped, realizing his door was never shut. Turning around curiously, he watched as Inoichi was shutting his door with him inside. Peeking out the door, he could see one of his guards laying on the ground. He looked at the blond man in curiosity, wondering what it was he was doing. Until he saw the kunai in his hand. And. Cliffinger. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy it. If you want the next part of this video, turn on that bell notification. Like, subscribe and comment down below. And also check out the others' videos. I have created and enjoyed it. See you guys next video. So hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto is neglected by his family and becomes ANBU Black Ops. Part 5. If you guys enjoy this, what if, and you want the next part of this video, comment down below. And let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And also share this video with your friends. And check out the description. And check out my playlist. So let's start the video. Chapter 8. Inoichi stood there with the blade held firmly in his grasp. His face set in a look of remorse for what he was about to do. He looked Naruto in the eye from his spot at the door. His stomach churned seeing the nonchalant look of the red-headed man in white. It was daunting just gazing into those cold blues. In this moment, he realized things he had never truly noticed before. Such as the way Naruto's ANBU tattoo seems to have been peeled off. Or the way Naruto's eyes never gave away emotion. In his studies, he's learned to tell the motive of someone by the dilation of their pupils. Feelings of happiness, affection, or laughter will cause it to expand. Feelings of anger, hatred, or fear it closes. Not his. His eyes stay fixed in tiny pinpoint dots, unfazed by anything. It was haunting to have those two piercing bullets beaming into your own orbs. Wink. Inoichi Yamanaka. He said with a smile creeping onto his face. I must say, I am surprised. Inoichi took a timid step forward. No words would come to his mind as he thought up something to say. To what do I owe this visit? He asked as if he were oblivious to the kunai and fighting stance. I came to kill you. He said, completely out of breath for some reason. Naruto's smile never changed and he didn't care to get into a fighting stance. Kill me? He asked. What for? You know why? Inoichi shouted out. Naruto just raised an eyebrow as if he didn't. You're trying to use Ino somehow. I know it. Use her? Naruto asked curiously. Of course I'm trying to use her. He said, angering the man. She is my doctor after all. I'm trying to use her to get better and make it out of this deranged. Psychotic. Mind of mine. He said, spitting that word out in a clear way to mock the man. Inoichi just adjusted his grip on his kunai, hoping to end this quickly. Naruto chuckled at him. Inoichi. Look, we both know you can't beat me. Even without chakra I could kill you. Naruto said. Inoichi wouldn't listen as he slowly began circling the younger man as a lion would, preparing to attack. Naruto sighed and when he did, Inoichi jumped into action. He charged Naruto with a roundhouse kick that was grabbed effortlessly and held onto with an unbelievable grip. Ah! He yelled, slashing at the boy's arm and jumping back. He didn't have much time to nurse his injury before he was kneed square in the chin and thrown against the wall. Naruto had his forearm in Inoichi's throat with his feet dangling from the ground. The hand with the kunai was pinned to the wall as well. You really wanted to kill me, huh? Naruto said, no sign of effort whatsoever for him. Huh. Inoichi, this was such a sad attempt at my life. Inoichi just gurgled, trying to rip the red-headed's arm from his throat so he could breathe. Since you are probably going to die here pretty soon. I will give you a small bit of final satisfaction in knowing that you were right. Dr. Yamanaka plays quite the role in my escape and she has been progressing quite nicely. In fact, I think this right here may be the final key. The last hill to climb before she devotes herself to me. Inoichi was seeing absolute red at this point and he struggled harder and harder to break free but was having very little effect. Once she outlives her usefulness in my escape, I'll most likely allow her to live simply because of her services. But, if she becomes a hindrance such as yourself, she just may have to greet you in the afterlife. He said with a sinister grin. Hell, since I'm a nice guy, I'll send your wife as well. He said with a laugh until he could hear keys urgently being shoved into his door from the outside. His grin increased as he released his grip on the man. He delivered a very sharp jab to a spot on his throat. Inoichi began coughing vehemently and he realized he couldn't speak. Naruto seemed to stumble back on his heels, giving him the chance he needed. He pounced on his downed form and held his kunai up with both hands intent on driving it straight through the chest of his target. Faintly, he heard a yell of Inoichi. Stop. He paused and looked up to the door to see Ibiki and two of the guards ready to take him. He couldn't speak, but he would not leave this place without ending his life. He brought the kunai up and drove it down as hard as he could. His strike ended when a kunai lodged itself into the center of his forehead. Naruto stared up lifelessly at the kunai just a few inches from his chest. He stared into the fading light in the eyes of the man who was leaking blood on his face. A very slight smile creeped onto his face watching Inoichi's body slump lifelessly off to the side. This would definitely move things along. Ino sat in her room staring at her ceiling, her mind gone completely. She was feeling a little anxious as she sorted out her recent emotions for the things in her life, mainly Naruto. This was supposed to be a professional relationship between them, and yet she felt so connected. How deeply was she into it? She couldn't tell. What would be the repercussions of this turning into love? That was the real question at this point. What would her friends think? Well, her old friends. Namely Mito and Menma. Or the village. What would happen to her for falling in love with a patient? She'd probably be locked up in the same institution. Separated by wall on wall, no more sessions, no more contact with her supposed love. She couldn't take that. Ino wished it were simpler. She wished it was as simple as just declaring him sane again and getting him out, but that wasn't the case. If she declared him sane, he'd possibly be moved back to the prison. That would definitely split them apart. Oftentimes, she wished they could just go. Just get out of the village and be together. But, what if her feelings weren't returned? What if Naruto didn't love her the way she loved him? Then what would she do? So many questions and no way to get them answered. There was a tap at her window next to her bed. She slowly looked over to see an ANBU agent. She sighed and looked back up to her ceiling. Her window slid open and the ANBU agent addressed her. Yamanaka-sama. It is to my dearest regret that I must inform you, Inoichi Yamanaka has been killed. Ino showed no sign of emotion whatsoever. In fact, he wasn't even sure if she heard him. If you would like, I could escort you to the hospital. Your mother is there. It's fine. Thank you. She said flatly, dismissing the man. The ANBU agent lingered there for a few seconds before shutting her window and leaving. Ino's gaze remained locked on her ceiling. No emotion shown whatsoever. These were the first signs of alexithymia. She didn't feel anything. She was supposed to feel sad about news like that. If it were a few months ago, she'd be completely heartbroken. Now, it was just like someone told her breakfast was ready. She remained there for another hour before rolling out of bed and throwing her sandals on, heading out the door. Walking into her old childhood home, Ino was greeted to the side of her mother and a glob of her friends comforting her. There was Kushina, Yoshino, Mito, Tsume, and others Ino didn't know. Her mother, dramatic as ever, was balled up on the couch with a tissue pressed firmly against her face. The others around her were whispering words of comfort that seemed to be doing nothing. Then, she saw Ino and, surprising to everyone, she saw Red. You. She spit out harshly at her. You. Fucking. She yelled as she stood up and tried to jump at her. Ino stood in her spot, confused but unfazed. The women around her did their best to hold her back, not sure what was happening. I fucking. She yelled out until her string of curses mushed together in her crying. God. If you had never taken that stupid case. He'd still be here. Fiori-chan. Kushina yelled among the others in disbelief at their friend's words. Calm down, you're just upset. She tried to reason with the crying woman. No. Get off me. She yelled, still trying to force her way to Ino. Get your fucking hands off me. She yelled, trying her damned hardest. Mito stood to her feet and led the still silent Ino out the door to defuse the situation. Ino stood on the porch looking out to her mother's garden for a few seconds. Before Mito could say anything, the blonde vegan walked down the pathway. Hesitant at first, Mito slowly followed her. On the way out of the garden, Ino plucked a rose from the bush and continued walking. Mito followed Ino, trying to think of something to say to her. She was a few paces behind her staring at the back of her head. She realized how long it must have been since they actually spoke. Of course she remembered the party a few days ago, but that was not a conversation. It was just drunk Ino starting mess, and they all understood. Truth be told, Mito was still a little angry up to the point she heard of Ino's father dying from her mother. She was angered by the heap of mess that took place between her and Sasuke. It wasn't something she was prepared to deal with, but after a long talk, they dealt with the issues and resolved the conflict. Now, staring at the blonde woman's back, she was mesmerized by how long her loose hair was. It was much longer now that it wasn't in her old ponytail. It was quite a bold-fashioned choice for Ino Yamanaka to let her hair flow freely. Thinking back, that's how it was at the party as well. Was it just her new style? Her hair aside, there was a lot different with the girl. She wasn't normal anymore. She was always quiet, a lot less social, and very condescending. Mito couldn't understand why that was. Maybe she just got out of a bad relationship. Or maybe she was in one. When Mito finally zoned out of her own thinking, she realized they were at the Hokage monument. Ino just stood there, staring out at the village with dead-looking eyes. Mito slowly crept up beside her. There were words on her mind, but her mouth refused to speak them. They were words of encouragement and questions for the scorned. For whatever reason, her tongue wouldn't extend them to Ino. She stared at the side of her face trying to get a read on her old friend. She had no shine in her eyes. No smile on her face. No tear stains or tears brimming in her eyes. For someone as expressive as Ino usually is, this was very unsettling. "Mito." Ino called out slowly. Mito turned her head more towards her to display to her that she is listening. "Are you in love?" Mito blinked at that. In her mind, it was almost obvious what this was about. Ino was still in love with Sasuke, and she was jealous of her. It explains the party incident, but not much else. What could she say to make her feel better? What could she do? "Yeah. Ino." She said. "Yeah." Ino's eyes never shifted from the village. "What does it feel like?" Mito turned back to the village and thought about it. "It's wonderful." Ino shook her head. "But, what does it mean? Feel like?" She repeated, putting emphasis on feel. Mito turned back to her, wondering what it was she wanted her to tell her. "It feels like a warmth in your heart that burns when you're not with that person, but comforts when you are." Ino's hand came up and touched her heart, just poking at her chest for a second. Mito watched her curiously. Then, she started chuckling. Then giggling. Then laughing. Mito watched her laugh into the wind and saw that a tear ran down her face. When she finally calmed down, she was left there with a content smile and she turned to Mito. I'm in love," she said. Mito wasn't sure what to say since she still had a hunch she was talking about Sasuke, but she couldn't accuse her of such a thing without being certain. Ino's chuckling came back. HMHM. HMHM haha. Fuck. She yelled out, scaring Mito when she dropped to her knees. Mito quickly kneeled down next to her, rubbing her back. "Ino. What's wrong?" "This is a good thing," Mito said, reassuring her. Ino just continued to cry as she shook her head. Is he taken?" she asked cautiously. Ino shook her head and Mito released the breath she didn't know she was holding. "At least it wasn't Sasuke." "Then, what's the problem?" Ino sat back on her heels and stared out to the village again, her eyes and cheeks puffy and red. She ran her hands through her hair and held it in place on top of her head. "Mito. What would you do if, for whatever reason, you couldn't be with Sasuke?" she asked her with desperation just oozing from her words. Mito was as confused as she'd been all night as she thought about it. If I couldn't be with Sasuke?" She repeated the question to give herself a little time to think. I'd do just about anything I could do. I'd do anything to make it to where we can be together," she said after some thought. She had no idea the monster she just unleashed with her words of truth. Ino's red puffy eyes stared intently at the village, as if it were going to be the last time she saw it. Her heart was set in stone, and her objective was now apparent. Kushina sat next to Kiori as the last remaining friend there. It was well beyond 2 in the morning, but she refused to leave until Mito brought Ino back to speak with her mother. Kiori had eventually calmed down with her rant of blame placing and realized how ridiculous her accusation was. She was crying now because of it. She had just demonized her daughter for doing something she believed she could do. It wasn't Ino's fault. It was Inoichi's obsession with that man that caused this and nothing else. There was no one to blame here but Inoichi. Her heart throbbed as she thought of what she told her daughter. It was blame for the sake of blame and she wanted so badly to apologize to her. They had been waiting for 2 hours now. Mito finally came into the door, a confused expression on her face. Where's Ino?" Kiori asked, hopefully. Mito looked at the woman somberly. She went home," Mito said. Kiori's tears came back full force and she bawled her eyes out. Kushina pulled the woman into her chest once again and began whispering sweet nothings into her ear as if it were a practiced skill. "Mito, tell your father I'll be staying here with Kiori please," she told the Redeed who nodded to her and left. 2 hours later, Mito walked into her and Sasuke's apartment. It was dark and quiet so she figured he was asleep. She kicked her shoes off and headed to take a shower. While in there, she thought over what Ino and she actually talked about. It wasn't what she expected to discuss with someone who just lost their father. Why was she thinking about love when her father had just died? Why did she not even mention her father? Was she bottling it up? If so, then she'd have to fix that tomorrow. She'd have to reason with Sakura and Tenten to help her of course, since they were still a little mad about the whole party incident, but they'd understand when she told her the circumstances. Ino had been far too distant for far too long. When she finished with her shower, she dressed in a plain t-shirt and some shorts as she climbed into bed with Sasuke. As soon as she did, he wrapped his arm around her as if he had been waiting for her. She smiled and rubbed his forearm. Yeah, if there was anything that prevented her from being with Sasuke, she'd do absolutely anything. That was a fact. That begged the question, who was it Ino was talking about? What would she have to do for this mystery man she had fallen in love with? Mito prayed it was nothing insane, but by the way she was acting, she could take a guess it wasn't something innocent she was talking about. What if it were something like deserting the village? Or killing someone who was trying to kill him. Maybe she fell in love with a civilian who got into some kind of trouble. She would ask the blonde girl tomorrow. Maybe as her friends, they could help her in whatever this endeavor of love was. It was the right thing to do. The duffel bag over her shoulder and a hooded ANBU agent behind her, Ino walked into the asylum, instructing two of the guards that she was having a midnight session with her patient. Seeing the ANBU with her, the two nodded and went to retrieve the patient while she signed in. She and the ANBU went to the room and waited patiently. "Ino, what are we doing here?" the man asked, apparently being quite familiar with her. "Ashi, just help me with this one thing please," she told him simply. Ashi stared at her curiously. He knew the patient she came to see, and he also knew what happened a few hours ago. "If we're here to kill or harm him in any way, I will not participate," he said, watching her search through the big bag she brought with her. Ino rolled her eyes. "We're not," she said, "I'm just here to speak with him." "Then why am I here?" he asked her. "I just wanted a friend with me," she said convincingly. Ashi looked at her and sighed beneath his mask. "But why do I have to be in full uniform?" Ino sighed at the continuous string of questions. "So that you look more intimidating, Tashi," she said as if it were obvious. He looked at her in confusion once more. He was an ANBU as well. "And I'm just a recruit. I don't think he'll be intimidated," he told her. Ino shook her head. "Believe me, he will," she said with a sigh as they then waited in silence. When she could hear his footsteps coming down the hallway, she dug in her bag again and pulled out a bottle of blue pills. "Here," she said, handing one to Tashi. Before he could speak she continued. "Put it in your mouth and bite down on it. It's a Yamanaka family recipe. It will allow you to go into his mindscape with me. That's what I plan to do. It will make you feel a bit woozy at first, but it should pass." But that being enough of an explanation, he lifted his mask enough to slip the pill into his mouth and do as he was told. The door opened up to two guards bringing Naruto in. He looked over to Ino with a smile and didn't miss the way her lips curled up slightly. He then looked over to the blank-faced hooded ANBU agent a few feet behind her. When he was sat down, the two guards nodded to Ino and the ANBU agent before leaving the room. They sat there in silence and Naruto looked as though he were about to say something. Well, Dottie began until he was cut off by Ino putting a finger up, silencing whatever he was about to say. He looked at her strangely for a second until the ANBU agent started to wobble on his feet. Naruto stared at him in confusion when he fell over and began convulsing. He looked back to Ino to see her smiling at him. He grinned back at her, catching on to whatever was happening. "Hey," she said with a smile and watery eyes. Naruto smiled back at her. "Hey." Ino bit her grinning lip, trying to find words to say. I brought you something," she said, happily pulling her bag up. Reaching in, she pulled out a bottle of ink and a brush with a few papers. Naruto smiled at her. "For practicing your calligraphy and whatnot." She nodded his way. He nodded back. "Oh yes, of course," he said as if it were obvious. He looked at her in amusement. "What?" she asked. "Can't do it?" she asked. He grinned and held his wrists up, showing her the cuffs as if she couldn't see them. She gave him a slick smile and began crawling across the table seductively. In a smooth motion, she pulled a kunai out, whirling it about before driving it down into the metal table, lodging it into the surface right between his hands. He didn't even flinch. "Bet yourself out, Mr. ANBU," she mocked as she laid down on the table with her feet crossed behind her, much like a kid laying before a fireplace. "Ah. Not gonna make it easy for me?" he asked with a smile, remembering their first conversation. "Where's the fun in that?" she replied, catching on. Naruto chuckled and pulled the kunai from the table. After a bit of messing with the lock, the cuffs finally opened, freeing his hands. Rolling his wrists out, he stood up and removed his shirt, giving into quite the sight as she stared at his chiseled body that seemed like he hadn't missed a day of training. She grinned at him and watched as he laid the sealing paper in front of her and began marking it. "You sure you know what you're doing?" she asked. "It's been a while." He smirked. "I've seen these seals every day for 5 years. I know what I'm doing." "Guess you're lucky they didn't put any on your back then, huh?" she asked him. He chuckled. "That, my dear, is the confidence of these simple-minded fools. Like me?" she asked him playfully as she flipped over to her back. He continued to mark the seals on the sheet of paper. "Well, you're nothing like them now, are you?" he asked rhetorically. "No. You're slightly better." "Slightly?" she asked him. He put the brush down and stood to where his face was directly over hers. Ino's eyes continued to dart between his lips and his eyes as he spoke. "Yes, slightly." He nodded. "You're still stuck in this fantastic little mind of yours," he said, tapping her forehead. "If you can step outside of that, then you'll be free," he said, going back to the seal. "Will you free me?" she asked him. He halted his writing and looked at her. "Perhaps," he said simply, going back to his work. Ino got off the table and stripped Tashi of his ANBU attire. When there was no more need for him, she performed a low-level fire technique she knew and burned the body. When she turned around, Naruto was staring at her with a look she wasn't familiar with regarding him. It was close to amazement with a hint of further amusement. "What?" she asked him innocently with the burning body behind her still raging with flames. Naruto smiled at her. "Nothing. But, I am done," he said, taking the paper and slapping it to his chest. It began to glow for a few seconds until Ino could visibly see the prison seal begin to slide off of his body as if someone were pouring water down his frame. Naruto's eyes shot open as if he were a junkie who just got their fix. It was the first time chakra flowed freely through his body in 5 years. Holding his hands out, he created 2 Rasengan and chuckled. "You, doctor, have done me a great service." He stalked her, letting the balls of blue chakra die out. Ino continued to smile at him as he came closer and closer. Before he came too close, she put her fist on his chest. "We're not done yet," she said, patting the ANBU uniform on the table. He raised an eyebrow but got the hint. He slipped into the uniform as Ino watched him from her seat hungrily. When he was fully dressed, he put the mask on. "Let's get out of here," she said, until he stopped her. "Just one more thing," he said, going through hand signs. In a puff of smoke, a naked Naruto clone stood there. Naruto wrote a few seals on his chest and the clone put his white clothes on. He then looked back over to the spot the body was being burnt. He went through a few hand signs and used a much more powerful fire technique that completely incinerated the body within seconds. When that was done, he performed a duo technique of wind and water to cool the room back down to normal temperature. From there, Ino and the ANBU left the room while the 2 guards came back in and escorted Naruto back to his room. They walked out of the asylum with absolutely no question being asked. No one stopped them or looked at them whatsoever. Naruto Namikaze was free. Break. Naruto left the village via the ANBU secret entrance, with Ino following his every move. When they were on the outside of the wall, Naruto breathed a sigh of relief. "Well, thank you very much for your help, Dr. Yamanaka. You, I must say, have been my favorite doctor," he said as if they were parting ways. "Wait. What?" Ino asked, stepping closer to him. "What are you talking about?" she asked him urgently with a very awful feeling welling up in her stomach. Naruto raised his eyebrow at her. "I am thanking you for your services up to this point," he said simply. Ino shook her head. "What does that mean? Does that mean you don't need me anymore?" "Precisely. Now you're getting it," he said, clapping his hands together. Ino couldn't breathe. "No. No, no, I fucking helped you," she yelled at him. Naruto shortened their distance in a second and pinned her to the tree behind her with her collar in his hand. "No. No, what you did was try and warp my perception. You left me in a black hole of rage and confusion." Wink. Ino shook her head. "No. I love you," she told him desperately. He smiled at her and began chuckling. "I love you," she yelled louder. "And you love me too." He let her shirt go and began to pace around. "Oh, is that so? Haha." He laughed again. "Yes. You do," she yelled. "You feel like no one has ever loved you before, so you won't accept my love because you're afraid it's not real," she said, giving him so insight into what she deduced within her own mind. Naruto stopped in his stride. "Ah, how wrong you are," he said, stalking her. "No, love causes weakness when your so-called lover is weaker than you. That's why the fling between us ends here," he explained, pulling a kunai from the holster on his leg. "What are you gonna do? You gonna kill me?" she asked. Naruto chuckled and threw the kunai her way. Ino didn't move or flinch whatsoever when the kunai hit the tree a few centimeters close to her head. Naruto seemed impressed by that, if even a little. "No. No, I'm not gonna kill you," he said, stalking closer to her. "If you die, it is because you're weak and this little spat of ours will have been for nothing," he said, pulling the kunai from the tree. "What are you gonna do to me?" she asked him, not a hint of fear in her voice whatsoever. Naruto stared her in the eye as if judging her resolve. "Well," he said, turning around. "Follow me and you will see. You may back out at any point of our little experiment. If you choose to do so, you may possibly have time to return before they realize you're gone," he said as she followed him through the woods. She walked right next to him and looked him in the eyes. "Never," she said seriously with a fire in her eyes that Naruto just had to notice. "Yeah, well, we'll see about that," he said. They walked through the woods surrounding Konoha for what felt like hours until they came upon a somewhat secluded area. Naruto bent down and pushed chakra through the ground and a secret passageway began to open up. He stood to his feet and pointed into it. "After you," he said with a daring smile. Ino didn't hesitate and went right in. She stumbled through the darkness for a few seconds until the torches lining the walls seemingly lit themselves. When they did, she knew exactly where they were. They were in one of the bases of the notorious psychopath Orochimaru. There were various broken glass tubes and quarantine signs all over the place. It would seem as though this one was already disassembled, so what were they doing here? She followed Naruto as he walked deeper into the base. Soon, they entered another room and onto a platform overlooking vats of some kind of black liquid. "You see that?" Naruto asked her to point it out. Ino was getting a little worried at this point. "That is what made me the man I am today. That is your trial. You bathe in this liquid. And I will accept this love of yours." He explained. Ino looked back into it to see it was boiling. In other words, it was probably like acid at this point and would most likely kill her. She looked at him with a broken heart. "I know what you're trying to do," she said, staring at his chest, unable to look him in the eyes. "You want me to kill myself. So that you don't have to deal with me anymore," she said. Naruto showed no expression at her astute observation. "No, I want you to prove your devotion," he explained. "Prove your love to me." Ino shook her head. "You know I'll die if I touch that stuff. You're not an idiot and neither am I." Still, he was unfazed. "So? You're saying you wouldn't die for me?" he asked her, casually staring her in the eyes. Ino's eyes moved up the length of his face until they were deadlocked in a staring match. He was daring her to do it. He really wanted her to die. It hurt her heart worse than if he had just taken that kunai and plunged it into her chest. After everything she's done for him, she was nothing but a nuisance to him. Ino truly believed she had found a connection in someone. Clearly her assumption was misplaced as he didn't seem to care much about her. She fell for him twice and got hurt both times. What more did she expect? She slowly backpedaled until her feet were hanging over the ledge. Turning around, the vat of chemicals was less than a foot away from the ledge. So hot, the bubbles that popped splashed up and hit her ankles, burning her a bit. If Naruto didn't want her, then no one would. More accurately, if she couldn't have Naruto, then she no longer wanted to live anymore. Maybe death was what called her at this point. Slowly, she began to fall back. In less than a second, she thought back to all of her best moments in life. Most of them involved Naruto himself. Even as she was a few milliseconds from death, she couldn't help but love the retarded psycho. This was the cause of unrequited love. Death. She could feel the heat of the vat of chemicals burning her back at this point, but she could also feel something tugging her. Opening her eyes, Naruto was holding the front of her shirt. The bottom of her hair was dipped in the chemicals, but her feet were still on the ledge. He saved her. A tear leaked out of her eye as she looked up into the blues of Naruto, who was smiling down at her. "Now that," he said with a chuckle. "That's proof." Pulling her up closer, he leaned down and kissed her. Ino melted into the passionate connection and wrapped her arms around his neck. He pulled them back onto the platform and she deepened the kiss immensely, not wanting this moment to end. A duo was born that would shake the world like natural disasters. 3 hours later, Ibiki checked over the sign-in sheet, finding it weird that Ino would come and see Naruto as late as she had last night. Especially with the circumstances of Inoichi's death, so he was headed to check on the retard to ensure he was still alive. Maybe she had done something to him. With a tray of breakfast in his hand, he opened the door. Naruto was laying on his mat staring up at the ceiling. He looked over at Ibiki but didn't say anything. "Hey Naruto," he said, walking over to him. "I was just coming to check up on you." Naruto still didn't respond. Ibiki ignored it and put the tray down next to him. "I know Ino came to see you last night," he said questioningly. Is there any reason for that?" "No reason. Just to talk," he responded with a sudden smile. Ibiki was surprised by that. It was weird of course, but Naruto was always weird, so he didn't pay too much mind to it. "Right, well," he said, looking at his shirt. He stopped and a sickening feeling dropped to his gut. Slowly he looked into the eyes of the patient to see a mocking glint in his eyes. Ibiki knew. This was not Naruto Namikaze. The sealing ink on his body was smudged, meaning it was written with paper ink, not body ink. He pulled a kunai from his pouch and drove it into his body. He took a timid step back when it actually stabbed him. For a second he thought he was hallucinating and he actually killed a patient, but then the body disappeared in a poof of blood and smoke. God damn it. Naruto Namikaze was not here. Ibiki stood to his feet and ran out of the room as fast as he could. This was not good. This was far from good. He ran out of the asylum intent on informing the Hokage of the troubling news. No one would be ready for what was coming. No one. Chapter 9. 1 year later, the house in the middle of the forest surrounding Kumo was in an uproar of panic as the 2 remaining occupants ran for their lives. One was a brown-haired man with a cut running down the side of his face, leaking fresh blood. The other was an elderly woman who was struggling up the stairs. They were both covered in blood that wasn't all theirs. The brown-haired man pushed the older woman to make her move faster. When they were on the 2nd floor, he pushed her into the hall closet and shut the door. They both scrambled to the back wall, hidden in the shadows of the hanging clothes. The man was holding the woman's mouth shut to stop her whimpering. In the distance, they could hear the sound of someone screaming for their life. It was a man, one that they both seemed to be quite familiar with, as his cries incited more and more tears from them. Then, suddenly the screaming stopped and they both knew why. Now, the only sound was the faint yet clear sound of footsteps slowly treading up the stairs. With every step, there was an extra 2 thuds that they couldn't place. Then, whoever it was, finally reached the top step and stopped. The house fell deathly silent for a short few seconds. Then, the assailant began walking again. This time, they could clearly hear something being dragged across the floor. It sounded sharp and metal. 2 doors away from the closet they were in, the door was kicked in roughly. When the person saw no one in there, they went to the next door and kicked it in. Again, no one. Through the shutters of the closet, the brown-haired man could now see the body of the person as they walked in front of the door. It was clearly a female by the curves of the body. She was dressed in a white form-fitting shirt underneath a red jacket that only went down to below her ribcage, which she left unzipped. She also wore a short tight pair of black shorts that didn't reach below her mid-thigh. The whole outfit was drenched in blood splatter. In her hands were 2 swords, held in reverse grip with the tips touching the ground. Most likely the dragging sound he heard. She was staring at their door. This one being one that opened out, she went to grab the doorknob and the brown-haired man tightened his grip on the elderly lady's mouth to keep her from screaming. Hoping and praying to whatever divine power that they somehow made it out of. He shut his eyes awaiting the inevitable. Suddenly, there was a crashing sound in the room next to theirs. The girl released the doorknob and turned her head. Now, the brown-haired man got a peek at her hair which was blood red towards the bottom but faded into a bright blonde. She walked away to investigate what the sound was and the brown-haired man breathed a sigh of relief as quietly as he could. He loosened his grip slightly on the old lady and whispered to her to stay quiet. Slowly and gently, he crawled his way over to the door. She had already partially opened the door, so he just pushed it open a little more. It creaked ever so slightly and he cursed his luck. Looking down the hall in the direction she went, he couldn't see her. He couldn't hear her either. Seeing a chance at an escape through the window at the end of the hall, he crawled back to the old woman. Very quietly he whispered his plan. Okay. The window at the end of the hall is wide open. If we can make it, then we can run for it. The old woman was vehemently shaking her head, not liking the idea. We have to. Hey, we have to. He said more harshly. If we stay here we will die. The old woman bit her lips together and shut her eyes, mentally judging her odds. Figuring there was no other choice, she nodded her head. He nodded back at her and prepared to crawl towards the door, but quickly jumped back against the wall when he heard whistling from down the hall. Again, walking by their room was the girl stained with blood. She was still dragging one of her swords across the ground, but she was swinging the other around as she whistled. She was just about to pass by when the old woman could no longer hold her breath. She exhaled as quietly as she could, but that seemed to be enough for the girl to stop in her tracks. The brown-haired man clamped his hand over her mouth once more. The girl walked back until she was standing in front of the door again. This time, he knew they were found out. Reaching to his right, he felt around for something to use. All he could find was an old umbrella that he held shakily in his hands. The door swung open and he drove the umbrella forward, but it was quickly knocked to the side and the right side of his chest was impaled into the wall behind him. Staring up at her, he was horrified by the mask she wore. It was a traditional Japanese porcelain doll mask, complete with the small lips, thin eye holes, and a small nose. The mouth of the mask was smothered in red lipstick and both of the eyes were smudged carelessly in red eyeshadow. Beneath her right eye was a small heart and along the jawline was the word rotten. I found her, love. She called out with an ominously happy tone. They heard another pair of footsteps casually walking up the stairs. Don't worry, Granny. She said looking at the old woman. My honey just wants to talk to you. The brown-haired man tried to pull the sword from his chest, but she twisted it more and more, causing him to continue screaming. Then, they were greeted by the other masked assailant. He was wearing a blood-red shirt, black pants tucked into black tape with black sandals. Over the red shirt he wore a black hoodless jacket with a high collar that he left unzipped. The jacket and pants had many pockets on them, and he had an empty sword sheath on his back. His mask was a plain expressionless white mask that cut off at his hairline. The design of the mask was blood red, very jagged, and crudely painted on a smile that went from cheek to cheek. The eye holes were hardly visible amongst the blacked-out smudged eyeshadow that covered them. His blood-red hair was slicked back and seemed wet or oily, as a strand or two hung over the front edge of his mask. Well, he said squatting down in front of the terrified old lady. Miss Kibui. Former secretary to the Raikage. The old lady did her best to sink into the wall behind her. Don't be afraid. I would just like to talk to you. My name is unimportant as I am nothing more than an idea. What do you want? Yelled the brown-haired man. The masked man looked over to him in curiosity. Then he looked back at his assailant. Why is he still alive? Sorry hun, thought you'd want to use him as leverage. She ripped a sword out of his chest and slit his throat. Flicking the blood off of the blade, she shoved it back into the empty sheath on the masked man's back. The old woman cried in desperation seeing the blood leak out from his throat. Hey. he said, getting closer to the woman and stroking her face gently. "There's no need for that," he whispered to her. "Just answer my questions and we'll be alright." Now, the Reikage. Sitting in his office, the Godame Hokage Menmanamicas looked over the recent report he received on the masked assailants. It was a cry for help from a second village, this one unexpected. 2 months ago he received a distress message from the hidden sand village Kazukiage Gara about 2 masked individuals who massacred one of his former associates' homes, apparently fishing for information regarding himself. It was just a simple heads up for the Hokage to ensure all of his associates were accounted for. Now, he received a letter describing the same situation from the new Mizukage, Chijuro. Kiri being a sort of neutral nation of Konoha, it was an unexpected warning. Apparently the masked assailant allowed one of the witnesses to live to relay a message to him. It was cryptic but threatening and seemed to be in pieces. This entire ordeal was becoming a headache, especially for someone who's only been in office for about 4 months so far. As of now the issue wasn't that great since the only people out of the village connected to him in any way were Sasuke and Mito. They embarked on their honeymoon a few weeks ago to Spring Country, but they could both pretty much handle anyone they came against. They were of course told to be on the lookout for Naruto even after all this time. There would be hell to pay if the other villages were to find out that the lunatic brother of the Hokage was out and about causing trouble. To Menma's knowledge, he hasn't done anything yet. He was spotted a few times with Ino of all people within a few of the minor villages, but he could never pinpoint their location. It also wasn't known if Ino is an accomplice of his or merely a victim in all this. While his father was in office, he sent multiple search and seizure missions out for the two, but only a few were able to spot them, but none able to catch them. Without Jireya's spy network, finding anyone became a much more difficult task for Konoha. Naruto being a former ANBU did not help as he was well aware of each and every tactic they used for certain missions. He was starting to understand his father's weary warning to him when he took office. He told him that this job was not simply about being the strongest in the village or making the tough decisions. He said it was a very hefty task of balancing not only the problems in and outside of the village, but your own life's issues as well. Naruto's escape influenced both of those tasks negatively. His disappearance led to many issues within the village, including the many demands for his head from not only the council members, but his own group of friends who believed he kidnapped Ino. Even Sakura, to Menma's disappointment. He understood it was her best friend, but Naruto was his brother and he expected her to at least understand how he felt. Ino was his friend too, so he got her point of view, but that didn't change things. As a father, Hokage, and husband Menma had a lot on his plate. Hopefully in time, everything would work itself out. He was even thinking about going to his father for help with the whole masked assailant thing. Not that he couldn't handle it. He was actually planning on relaying to every shinobi, jonin or higher, to be on the lookout for the 2 individuals with the orders to either capture or kill. He wasn't sure how effective that would be with a vague description of simply 2 masked assailants. He wasn't aware of their affiliation, ability, or even gender. It would be like chasing blank faces. For now, his plan was to wait for more information to rise. If things continued the way they were and Kumo or I were reached out with a similar complaint, then he'd definitely step up and think up a plan of action. A knock at his door broke him from his thoughts. "Come in." He called out, writing something down on the document before him. Sakura walked in with a baby carrier hooked onto her left arm and a diaper bag slung over her right shoulder. Menma smiled and stood up to greet her. Walking over he gave Sakura a kiss and received a beautiful baby laying carelessly in the carrier. "Hey there Sumire-chan," he said, pinching her cheeks. Sakura smiled, tickling her little feet. She's been missing her daddy all day. "So, I thought we'd come for a visit." Menma smiled gratefully and walked back to his seat with his daughter in his hands. "Well, I'm certainly glad you did." Taking a seat, he began to rock back and forth, uttering baby noises to make her laugh. "Today has been nothing less than stressful, I'll tell you that." Sakura walked around and set the carrier on the ground next to his chair and the diaper bag on a free spot on his desk. "I can tell. Have you ever eaten today?" Menma smiled bashfully with a chuckle. No. I must have forgotten," he said, scratching the back of his head. Sakura chuckled. "You baka. Wait here, I'll go get us something to eat," she said, walking towards the door. Menma chuckled and nodded, holding Sumire up so that they were face to face. "Dear Ka-san mean Sumire-chan. I hope you're more like me," he mocked Sakura. "Don't corrupt my daughter, you baka," she called out casually as she shut the door. Menma again chuckled at her and put his daughter back into the carrier next to him so that he could continue working. When she started crying he shoved her bottle into her mouth, silencing her instantly. A few minutes later, another knock at his door interrupted him. This time it was Kakashi. "Oh, Kakashi. What is it?" he asked, picking up Sumire so that he could feed her properly. "Meme, just stopping by to check up on you," he said, casually strolling in and taking a seat in a chair off to the side with his book in his hands. Menma's expression displayed playful annoyance. As per my father's request. He asked him in a knowing tone. Kakashi just smiled from behind his book. Can't blame him for worrying. There was a lot going on when he handed you the hat. Menma sighed and looked down at Sumire. I know, but still. I am Hokage for a reason. He doesn't have to worry about me all the time. Kakashi shrugged. Guess it's a parent thing. Menma smiled at that, looking down at his daughter, figuring he'd probably do the same thing. Well, tell him thanks for checking up on me, but I'm fine. He said in amusement. Kakashi smiled and nodded. Will do. While I'm here, anything you'd like to talk about? He asked him. Menma looked up and thought. Well, yeah actually. He shifted Sumire to his other arm. There could be a possible issue brewing that could possibly affect us later down the road. He said, getting serious. What's the threat level? Kakashi asked, putting his book away. Menma shook his head at the question. I'm not really sure. 2 masked individuals attacked associates of the cage demanding information on them. He explained. Kakashi looked up and thought. What do you mean by associates? Menma used his free hand to rummage through the piles of paper on his desk. Former sensei of the Kazekage. The previous Mizukage, Mei Terumi. He said, reading the report. The former cage? Kakashi asked in surprise. Menma nodded his head. Well, that means that they definitely have some kind of power. He remarked. Both of them sound as though they would have some kind of knowledge on their cage's personal life. That's what I'm afraid of. He said with a nod. Sasuke and Mito are out on their honeymoon. And you think they would dare attack them? They are both S-rank shinobi within the bingo book. Kakashi said. Menma nodded. Yeah, but if they were confident enough to attack a former cage, I doubt they'd shy away from that. He said. True. Kakashi said, thinking of all the information presented to him. Well, maybe we can use that. He said, thinking up a plan. Yeah, inform Sasuke and Mito of the imminent threat of 2 masked assailants, and they may possibly be able to defeat them and end whatever the two have planned. He explained. Cut the head of the snake before it can strike. Menma thought it over. It was a sound plan, but he didn't really want to give his sister and new brother-in-law a mission during their honeymoon. Though, this was a matter of village security, so he may have to. It would be better to have them vigilant out there if someone were actually planning to attack them. No matter how good of a shinobi you may be, you are still vulnerable to unplanned attacks. The key was to prepare for everything. Yeah, okay. He said with a nod. I'll send a carrier pigeon as soon as possible. Wiping the blood from her mask, Ino happily strolled alongside Naruto who, as usual, had a book shoved in front of his masked face. It's been a year since their escape from the village. Immediately after the whole chemical death initiation thing, they began a string of very confusing missions. It was like Naruto had planned out everything he wanted to do when he got out. Ino knew it was along the lines of malicious intent and most likely criminal activity, but she didn't really care. In fact, she was starting to almost enjoy the things they did. They were bad, but for some reason they gave her a rush she hadn't felt in. Well ever. Their first 2 months of freedom were spent traveling the various nations, digging up dirt and learning of the brewing alliances among the nations. There seemed to be more than a few. Iwa was apparently in contact with Konoha about squashing the recent conflicts between them in place of joining into an alliance with them and Suna. Kiri was still remaining neutral but was very interested in the budding alliances of the other nations. And Kumo was for the most part interested. It almost seemed like the world was nearing a peaceful time. They also dug up the dirt of the underground organizations of each of the nations. Konoha's route was seemingly in conflict with Kumo's Bolt organization. It was all very interesting to Naruto. He and Ino had been plotting their game plan every step of the way. As of recently, they've been hunting down personal information on the cage themselves. For what? Ino wasn't truly sure, but she knew it would be something. Currently, according to Naruto, they would need an army of their own before beginning their true goal. So, they were now traveling through the fields of Sunagakure in search of something. Or someone. Ino peeked over his shoulder. Wachuriaden? She asked in a playful manner as she slipped her mask back on. Oh, it's an absolutely dreadful book about this man's ridiculous theory on where we go when we die. He explained. Ino put her hands behind her back and swayed her shoulders as they walked. What does he think? Naruto pulled the book down from his face. Well, he believes there is some sort of purgatory that we go to await our judgment from Kami. He said, shaking his head in disbelief. Ino smiled beneath her mask. You don't think that place exists? She asked him, leaning forward to peek into his eye holes. No. He said immediately. No, that's just a scare tactic to force people into acting like civilized individuals. So what happens when we die? Ino asked him. Naruto sighed and looked up to the night sky and thought. We're just gone. There's no purgatory, no afterlife, no heaven, no hell. There is just non-existence. So you've never believed in religion? No. No, you see, religion is the human race showing its fear of being the top of the food chain. Aside from what people may believe, we are the superior species. Some could argue the tailed beasts, but they have been captured and contained for over a century. We are the most intelligent and intelligence is power. Ino was confused. Well, how does that tie in? Humanity fears power even though we all crave it. Therefore, they create stories of something a step higher so that everything that happens is for a reason in their eyes. He explained. Ino just smiled at him and grabbed his free hand on her own. You sure have thought about this, haven't you? She leaned her head against his shoulder as they walked. Naruto chuckled. Well, when you're locked up for 5 years it gives you some time to think. I'm sorry I didn't get you out sooner. She said sincerely. Naruto waved her off. That is not important. Patience is a virtue, I would have waited another year if I had to. Well, you didn't have to. She said, hopping onto his back. Effortlessly, Naruto caught her with his hands beneath her knees as he continued walking. And I am grateful for that. He said as Ino moved the strands of hair hanging over his mask. Which is why I keep you around. Ino snickered in disbelief. TCH, yeah. It's not because you love me or anything like that. She said in a playful tone. Naruto chuckled. Dr. Yamanaka, you are too much. Up ahead they could see a group of people walking their way. Looks like we have company, dear. She said, swinging her feet playfully. Naruto just snorted and continued along the path, undeterred. As they got closer and closer, they could make out what seemed to be a 4-man squad, possibly a team of genin and their sensei. Getting even closer, they could now see that they were from Konoha. The sensei was someone neither of them knew personally. It was a fairly muscular man with dark brown hair. His 3 genin stood behind him in fear of the 2 masked individuals they were about to pass. Naruto's eye holes peered into the brown-haired sensei with absolutely no emotion. In an attempt to maintain his composure, the man gave him a nod. Naruto paused for a slight second before nodding back. Ino was playing with the children behind him, staring at them with a smile beneath her mask. She tilted her head cutely, completely creeping them out with the blood-smeared markings on her mask and a few droplets still clinging to her legs. The sensei and his students breathed a sigh of relief when they passed the 2. Naruto just continued walking, not paying them any more attention. Ino was looking back at them for no apparent reason. The sensei turned around to check on his students and saw her looking back. He pushed them in front of him and continued walking. Ino turned back and chuckled into Naruto's ear. Break. Hours later, Naruto and Ino walked into a bar on the outskirts of Kusa. Sticking to the shadows of the shady place, they made their way to a very dark corner overlooking the people within. They sat there for a few hours until the individual they seemed to be waiting for finally made an entrance. A man with curly black hair and a scar running down his right eye. Naruto nudged Ino and she nodded, taking her mask off. Ino walked over to the free spot on the bar right next to the man, with a sway to her hips and a seductive smile plastered on her face. Leaning on the counter, she tapped her fingers against the countertop. Hey barkeep. I'd like a few shots. She said, getting the attention of the target. She could feel his eyes on her as she waited for her order. The barkeep came back and asked her how many she wanted and she replied 2. When he filled the glasses up, the target took that as a conversation starter. Hey. He quipped. Those both for you? Ino smirked his way as if she hadn't noticed him there. Of course they are. She said slyly. Girls are a little thirsty. She said, downing one of the glasses with little effort. The curly-haired man watched her the whole time. Well, in that case, let me buy you 2 more. He said, pulling out his wallet. The barkeep poured 2 more glasses. I'm Kai. He held his hand out for her to shake. Ino. She replied, shaking the appendage. She smiled at him knowing she was successful in her tactics. From there, she laid on the charm to the best of her abilities, which were a lot better than most. She talked him up with a small chat that made her want to slit her own throat. He wasn't necessarily dumb, but he was nowhere near the level of intellectual dialect she was used to. For the next 3 to 4 hours, she did well in talking him up and utilized her knowledge of psychology to get the information she needed from him. Somewhere along the way, they decided to leave the bar. With Naruto, unknowingly to Kai, following close behind. Naruto was spot on with picking this target. Apparently he was the leader of a very large group of nuke ninja and rogue samurai who despised the major shinobi countries for various reasons. They were a nameless underground circuit that had been around for more than a few years but had yet to take any major action for what he idiotically admitted to her was because of his own fear of being found out. Knowing the new information, Ino showed him her headband and expressed her desire to join his organization. Kai was at first unsure about it, saying they didn't usually take anyone who wasn't marked nuke in the bingo book. That's when she revealed she was one of the masked assailants that attacked the Kazekija sensei and the previous Mizukage, the 2 cases people were likely aware about at this point. I was surprised by that information, since those 2 individuals were starting to pop up on everyone's radar. He seemed to have a spy network a lot more complex and functional than the one the San and Jiraiya had in the past. Ino found it strange yet fitting that it seemed the only thing holding him back from causing true trouble for the world was his own cowardice. More importantly, she knew more about what Naruto was trying to do. They needed an adequate army, and it would seem as though they found one that could use a new leader. The more Kai explained it, the better it seemed to get. After he agreed she could join, he explained the functioning of the ranking and the members they have. They worked in a fairly organized manner with higher-ups, consisting of the highest-class Nuke Ninja, who reported information to himself directly. There were over 200 members in Kusa alone at the moment. At least 200 more either undercover or stationed elsewhere. All of them with a deep hatred for one or all of the major villages. Ino continued to lay the charm onto him until he finally decided to take her to the headquarters. On the way, Ino began badgering him about questions of himself. He was sure that he was the most powerful shinobi among their ranks, claiming he had to be to remain in power. Apparently, he was tested by a few high-ranked members before. They were actually notable individuals as well. People Ino had noticed from the bingo books whose bounties were cashed in. The most notable being the puppet master Sasori of Sunagakur. Kai instilled fear of his power among his ranks to gain the respect of his people, but he feared he was losing it. The problem was the people wanted action. They wanted something to assure them that this organization was going to do something soon. Kai, however, was unsure about this. His grandfather was the one to start this many years ago, and it was passed down to him as his father died in service. He was trained by his grandfather ruthlessly, and he admitted to Ino he really had no passion for harming the major villages. He had no reason for it. He was born and raised with the underground headquarters since birth. Ino decided, to keep it real, she would give him some advice. You know, if you don't take action soon, your people won't respect you. She said with a knowing tone. Or someone may come around and take them from you. I smiled bashfully. Yeah, I know. I don't know, maybe we'll start our own village. We've got a lot of members. He said. Ino shook her head with a hum of uncertainty. Changing your purpose will make them leave faster. I explained he knew this and said he had been working on a way to propose the idea to the forces. He had just been too nervous to actually do it. Ino saw this as an opportunity to possibly take even more action. She pecked him on the cheek with a seductive smile. They say a strong woman can give a man strengths he never knew he had. I looked over to her with a small grin tugging at his lips. What is it you're proposing, Ms. Ino? She placed her hand inside his with a bashful smile. Tell your troops your idea. I'll be with you every step of the way. I looked around the forest floor and thought. I don't know. He said timidly. I'll lose some of them. Ino nodded. True, but the ones who stay are the ones who are really there for you. She could see the realization and subtle belief in her words play out on his visage. He looked at the ground in front of them as they walked and he squeezed her hand gently. After a few moments, he looked over to her with a small smile and he nodded. Ino understood the gesture and rested her head on his shoulder. They walked for a few more minutes until they crossed a field. Reaching the other side, he pushed Chakra through the ground in a 3-round burst and a pathway opened up, leading underground. They were greeted by someone Ino knew of very well. Dadara, I was Mad Bomber. Hi, another night of bar hopping, huh? He asked him incredulously. Showing the respect he demanded, he walked right by him with his arm around Ino. It's Leader Sama to you and yes, another night of bar hopping. Dadara scowled at the back of his head as he followed the two. How many men are here? With a deadpan tone he replied. Close to 200. Great, have everyone in the main room. I have an announcement. He said walking further in with Ino. Naruto was a few paces behind the three, silently watching and casually strolling along, unnoticed. Dadara split away from the two to relay the message. Walking through a corridor, Kai and Ino passed two throne-like chairs, looking out to what she assumed was the main hall, as there were already more than 100 people scattered around, either training, eating or just casually talking. The room was absolutely massive, much larger than she assumed it would be. She and Kai walked forward passing the beautifully sculpted thrones down about 3 steps onto a small balcony overlooking the room. There were a lot of other corridors lining the sides of the gigantic room with people funneling out, filling the main room within minutes. Ino watched from Kai's side as men and women chatted amongst themselves waiting for the meeting to start. Below them was a raised and rounded area, seeming to be a platform for battle or entertainment. It was connected to a hall directly underneath them. Funneling out of it were 7 people she assumed to be the higher-ups. Individuals such as Dadara I was Mad Bomber, Kisame Hashigaki, the tailless-tailed beast, Haiden, the immortal, Aoi Rakusho, the thief of the sword of the thunder god, Zabuza Mamachi, demon of Kurigakure, Kakuzu, the man who fought Hashirama Senju, and Pukura, former hero of Sunagakur. It was a very lethal group of individuals that Ino found impressive. They were all S-rank criminals with a deep hatred for the major villages. Now, she was actually feeling slightly nervous. If they were faithful to Kai, then this wouldn't work. Squeezing Ino's hand once more, Kai began the announcement. There was a seal placed on the balcony that allowed him to be heard around the entire room. He walked forward and got the attention of the waiting listeners. "People," he said. "I have an important announcement." The entire room was completely drenched in silence, some of them thinking up what they thought he was going to say. Most of them hoped they were finally going to do something. As you all know, the primary goal of this organization has been the destruction of the major villages. He looked back at Ino, who nodded at him with 2 thumbs up and a comically insane-looking smile. He found it weird but ignored it and continued. "As of recently, we've been dormant in our actions." This statement got a wave of chuckles and giddy noises from the crowd. Everyone believed they knew where this was going. "I have a plan," he said, getting the people even more excited. Ino could see the eager body language of the 7 higher-ups below them and felt more reassured. They wanted to attack just as much as everyone else. His next statement caused an even greater reaction. "My plan is to abandon our previous objective and instead start our own village." The people were dead silent for a moment, trying to process what he said. When they did, the room erupted into outrageous shouts of anger. Kai watched them yell their discrepancies at him silently for a moment. Flashing his highly intense killer intent, he froze the room almost instantly. Ino was actually surprised by it. She realized he was a lot stronger than she imagined. The 7 higher-ups jumped up to the balcony to demand an answer. Haydn, being the most vulgar, began badgering him immediately. "Kai. What the hell are you talking about?" he yelled incredulously. "I didn't waste 3 years of my fucking life to be pulled back into another fucking village. You're an immortal jackass, but he's right," yelled Dodara. "The hell is wrong with you?" I stared at them indifferently with his hands behind his back. "We won't be a regular village," he tried to explain. "Yeah, no shit. We're made up of missing ninja," Aoi said casually as if he were speaking to an idiot. Zabuza pulled his sword from his back. "The only reason we are here is because of the mission," he said, pointing his blade at him. Kai stared at him unintimidated. "Oh, Zabuza is gonna challenge him?" Kisum said with an amused tone. "This is making Sharkskin tremble." I walked forward and stared him in the eyes. "That mission was started by my grandfather. He was a fool to believe he could take on the likes of the 5 Cage," he said in a threatening way. "If you wish to try and take my place, then by all means," he said threateningly. Zabuza couldn't even maintain eye contact with him. The others could see his sword slowly sinking down out of Kai's face. It was a strange sight for Ino to see, the demon of the mist shying away from an enemy. In front of a fellow swordsman no less. "Know your place, Mamachi," Kai said casually, stepping past them to continue his speech. The 7 of them turned along with him, seemingly going along with him. "I understand the issue with this, but I urge you to allow me to explain," he said, waiting for someone to say something. When they didn't, he continued. "The qualms of my grandfather do not extend to me. I have no hatred for the hidden villages, and I understand that you may. If so, I urge you to take it upon yourself to take action in your own way. If your hate is pure, then you will have no issue doing so." "Well, if that's not cowardice, then I don't know what is," said a new voice from behind him. The group upon the balcony turned around in surprise at the man brave enough to disrespect this monster before them. Naruto stepped around the thrones with his mask on and his hands behind his back. Ino, who was still behind the group, smirked at Kai, who looked at her in suspicion. She slyly placed her mask back on her head, and when Naruto got next to her, she leaned on his shoulder. "Kai," Akutaka said slowly. "Who are you?" Kai asked blankly, showing no fear or emotion of any kind. Naruto tilted his head slightly. "It is of no importance who I am. What's important is my plan and the necessities I need to complete it," he said casually, walking around. "You see, like these beautiful people around you, I have a certain abhorrence for the hidden villages." I just stared at him in confusion and slight annoyance. "Aoi, kill him," he said suddenly. Aoi drew his sword, but Naruto opened his jacket, displaying the paper bombs inside, and formed the hand sign ready to blow them. Shaking his head. "Let's not blow this out of proportion. Listen, Kai, as I understand, you are a man who invites challenges." I turned his way, staring at him. "You wish to challenge me to take my place?" he asked him threateningly, flashing his killer intent at the Redeed, who was not affected in the slightest. "Why, that's a splendid idea," he said with a smile beneath his mask. "You see, these people deserve a better leader," he said, addressing the crowd of onlookers listening to the tense conversation. "They don't need a spineless man afraid of his own demise." I jumped back and off of the balcony, landing on the circular platform, ready to fight. Naruto rolled his right shoulder out and slowly walked forward, paying no mind to the 7 high-classed killers who looked at him as if he were a fool. "You will die here today, Kai. It is your fear of death that will be your demise," he said, stepping off the ledge. He landed on the opposite side of the platform, staring across the way at the curly-haired man. "You seem so sure of yourself," Kai said with a bit of a smirk. "If you had any common sense, you'd look around and see that your confidence may be misplaced." "It is not," Naruto said simply, rolling up his left sleeve. He pushed chakra into the marking on his forearm and a sheathed sword and strap popped up. I am merely aware of the ending to this match. You know nothing of me, but I know everything about you. He strapped the sword to his back and unsheathed it. Kai raised an eyebrow in confusion. Have we met before? Naruto shook his head. No, but I've met you. You're a cowardly man, hiding behind power. He said holding his sword in a reverse grip. You are too kind for the role you play, which is why you refuse to take action. A man like you does not belong in an organization like this period, yet you lead it because no one has been able to best you. And you believe you can? He asked him casually. Naruto gave him a curt nod and said nothing else. Kai nodded back cockily and walked to the edge of the arena. He held his hand out to one of the nearby men, never taking his eyes off of Naruto. Sword. The man pulled it from its sheath and handed it to him. Well then, let's see it. With that, the two rushed forward. Kai went for a wild diagonal slash that Naruto blocked with his own. Spinning with the block, Kai went for an elbow to Naruto's face, but Naruto caught it and pushed it forward, spinning him back the other way. Ducking under the next violent slash, Naruto spun on his knees with his sword out from his body, nearly cutting Kai's leg. Getting to his feet, he jumped back, avoiding the stab from above as Kai lodged his sword into the ground. Pulling it out, he jumped towards Naruto who had just landed. Naruto fell back to his back as Kai came in for a roundhouse. While his leg was above him, Naruto jabbed him in the spot behind his knee. Kai landed and fell over when his leg gave out. He rolled out the way when Naruto threw his sword down where his chest would have been. The unarmed Naruto rolled forward and caught Kai's wrist before he could continue his slash. He leaned his head out of the way of the right straight and kicked him in the chest, sending him tumbling backwards. Kai stood up on his unresponsive leg and scowled at the redeed. Naruto rushed him and grabbed his sword on the way. He slid on his side, avoiding the bunch of kunai thrown by the curly-haired man. Kai jumped and threw his sword down, hoping to impale the still sliding enemy, but Naruto expertly shifted his body over, missing the blade by a hair. He rolled again, barely missing the ground-breaking stomp that nearly crushed his body. Kai yelled in rage and threw his sword forward, missing the blonde and instead impaling one of the watchers in the head. Naruto looked back momentarily and paid for it when he returned his gaze as Kai was already in his face, delivering a kick to his chest that made him lose grip on his blade. Before he could grab it, Kai jumped up and kicked it away. Naruto took that distraction and grabbed onto his raised leg. He held it until Kai fell back onto his back and kicked him away. They both rolled to their feet and rushed again. Kai slid down, avoiding the flying straight kick as Naruto flew over him. Getting back to his feet, he blocked the redeed's follow-up spinning back kick with ease and delivered a barrage of his own punches into his momentarily exposed ribs. Naruto hopped back and cradled his chest with green chakra emitting from his hands. He didn't have much time as a barrage of kunai flew his way, he jumped out of the way and the watchers behind him deflected the blades, suspending them above the platform. Acting quickly, Naruto kicked one forward and grabbed another. The one he kicked forward was caught by Kai who was already rushing him. Naruto parried his strike with a slash of his own. The two were deadlocked in a struggle of strength. Hand in hand, kunai and kunai. Kai peered into the black eye holes faintly seeing the cold, lifeless blue staring back at him. Loosening his wrist, Naruto allowed Kai's kunai to hurt himself, stabbing him in the shoulder as he plunged one into his thigh. Arg! Kai yelled, kicking him back with his other leg. Naruto rolled with a hit and stood back to his feet, now fresh out of weapons. Kai was now limping as he struggled to stay on his feet. Naruto rushed him, ignoring the injury to his shoulder. He engaged him, throwing a feint right hook that Kai leaned back to avoid. When he did, Naruto jabbed him in his injured thigh. Arg! He yelled again, dropping down to his knee. Naruto stood over him as if he already won. His breathing was steady and he didn't seem as though he even fought yet, other than the blood leaking from the hole in his shoulder. Kai's eyes were traveling around the room, looking at the people who were looking at the spectacle in shock. No one said a word, they just watched on in disbelief. "This is the peak performance of your so-called unstoppable leader?" he asked in a condescending way. "Not bad, but I have definitely had better battles." I chuckled and stood back to his feet. "Oh, believe me, I've got a lot more," he said as he started to walk back into the tunnel. Naruto raised his eyebrow, wondering if he had given up. "Close combat is not my forte. If you'd really like a battle, we should take it outside." Naruto watched him for a second before following. Break. The hefty group of people now circled around the field outside of their hidden base. Everyone is trying to cram around to see the fight. It had been so long since they witnessed their leader go all out and it would seem he would have to if he wanted to win this fight. When everyone settled in, the field was completely quiet aside from Ino, who was sharpening Naruto's discarded blade off to the side with the 7 higher-ups. Naruto stood calmly on the other side of the field, waiting for Kai to do whatever it is he believed would win him this fight. Kai was still trying to get used to the pain in his leg by bouncing on the balls of his feet a few times. With a sigh, he stopped. He pulled his shirt off, revealing a body riddled with tattoos of all kinds. He looked over at Naruto, who was as unintimidated as he had been the whole time. "I am finished with this game of cat and mouse," he said with conviction in his voice. "You wish to lead my people, I will not make it easy for you." Naruto said nothing. He took off running across the field, intent on continuing their battle. A few feet away from him, he jumped to his left, dodging the ball of flames headed his way. Immediately being forced to move again as another one came soaring towards him. Using his limited knowledge of Earth, he slammed his hands into the ground and a wall shot up in front of him, barely standing up against a ball of flames that collided with it. I watched the smoke clear away for a brief second before jumping up and away from the hands that popped out trying to snag his feet. Naruto jumped out of the ground and began rushing him again, performing a string of hand signs along the way. Kai blew another fireball his way which Naruto jumped over. Seeing this, Kai blew another one, but Naruto had finished his hand signs and blew a ball of water bigger than Kai expected, dousing his flame and coating the field in a thick mist. Kai jumped from the mist, not wanting to be caught in a trap. He stared into the cloud of white, awaiting some kind of movement. A shot of an air bullet tore through the mist too quickly for Kai to avoid completely, so he leaned out the way slightly, causing the bullet to shoot through his arm. Grimacing at the pain, he jumped out of the way of the next two, avoiding them narrowly. Naruto went through even more hand signs and blew a ball of flames at the curly-haired man. When Kai jumped away to avoid it, Naruto smirked beneath his mask, pulling at the thin ninja wire in his hands. Kai noticed the wire just in time and contorted his body clear of being tangled in it. In doing so, he didn't notice the Redeed come in with a brutal knee to his ribcage, sending him tumbling back down to the ground. He held his ribs and looked up at the two Redeeds who began walking towards him. He looked around at the people that were giving him the same look they were before. The look that told him he was losing. In truth, this was all he had. This man before him was too powerful. The people feared his almighty strength because he was able to easily beat Sasori, but in truth, he had help in doing so. It would seem he needed that help here as well. He stood up with a very intense look in his eyes. He took a few steadying breaths before he rolled his shoulders out. With a somewhat painful expression, a tattoo on the back of his neck began to glow an orange, almost red color and began to expand. Like markings of flames, it began expanding across his body rapidly, stopping just past his nose, almost reaching his other eye. The orange faded to black and the markings looked like regular tattoos. He felt amazing. Naruto watched him in interest. "I knew you were a snake," he said slowly, crouching down lower into his fighting stance. Kai's eyes lit up in excitement. The power within him was overbearing but incredible. With a crazy look in his eyes, he took off. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy it. If you want the next part of this video, turn on that bell notification. Like, subscribe and comment down below. And also check out the others videos I have created and enjoyed it. See you guys next video.